The Mojave Desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a brutal expanse of sand, rock, and heat that seemed designed to break human spirit. Elena Reyes stepped off the bus at Fort Irwin's National Training Center, and the afternoon sun hit her like a physical blow. Even through her sunglasses, the glare was blinding. The temperature gauge outside the reception building read 112 degrees Fahrenheit. Around her, dozens of recruits gathered their gear, their faces already glistening with sweat despite having been outside for less than a minute. Elena pulled her duffel bag over her shoulder and surveyed her surroundings with the quiet observation that had become second nature to her. She was one of 9 women among nearly 180 recruits. More significantly, at 5'2" and 118 pounds, she was easily the smallest person in the entire group. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The whispers started immediately. Look at that one, a male voice said behind her, not even bothering to lower his volume. She'll be gone by week 2. Guaranteed. $100. Says she doesn't make it past the first desert march. Another replied with a laugh. Elena's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral and her eyes forward. She had heard variations of these comments her entire life. Growing up in rural New Mexico, she had been the smallest kid in every class, the one teachers worried about during PE, the one coaches overlooked for sports teams. But Elena had learned early that being underestimated could be an advantage if you were patient enough to prove people wrong. Her father, a ranch foreman who had worked under the brutal New Mexico sun for 40 years, had taught her something the doubters never understood. Desert survival wasn't about size or strength. It was about efficiency, endurance, and mental toughness. Elena had spent her childhood summers working alongside him, learning to move deliberately in extreme heat, to ration water instinctively, and to push through discomfort that would break most people within hours. Listen up. The voice that shattered the afternoon heat belonged to Drill Sergeant Victor Cruz, a man who looked like he had been carved from the same unforgiving rock that surrounded the base. At 6'3" with a barrel chest and arms that strained against his uniform sleeves, he was an imposing figure whose reputation had preceded him to every recruit on that bus. Cruz was a legend at Fort Irwin. 22 years in the Army, 3 combat deployments, and a training record that was simultaneously admired and feared. He had trained thousands of soldiers, and he was known for 2 things: an uncanny ability to identify who would succeed under pressure, and an absolute unwillingness to tolerate weakness or excuses. You are now standing in the most challenging training environment in the United States Army, Cruz announced, his voice carrying across the assembled recruits with ease. The Mojave Desert will test every assumption you have about your own capabilities. Some of you think you're tough because you played sports or worked construction or survived whatever comfortable civilian life you came from. He paused, his cold, dark eyes scanning the formation with the precision of someone assessing equipment for defects. You are not tough. Not yet. Toughness is something you earn here, in this desert. When the temperature hits 120 degrees, and you still have 8 miles to march. When your body is screaming for water, and your mind is begging you to quit, that's when we find out who you really are. Elena stood perfectly still in the back row, her military bearing already more polished than many of the larger recruits around her. Years of ranch work had taught her the importance of conserving energy and heat, of standing in ways that minimized sun exposure, of breathing in patterns that maintained focus despite discomfort. Cruz's eyes swept past her once, then returned, lingering for a moment that felt like an eternity. His expression didn't change, but Elena could sense his assessment. She was small, female, and looked like she weighed less than the standard combat load every soldier would be expected to carry. Fall out and report to your assigned barracks, Cruz ordered. You have exactly 15 minutes to stow your gear and report to the training ground in PT uniform. If you're late, you'll run until I get tired of watching you. The recruits scattered toward their assigned buildings, and Elena found herself in a bay with 8 other women, all of whom towered over her by at least 3 inches. She moved with quiet efficiency to her assigned bunk, unpacking her gear with the methodical precision her father had drilled into her since childhood. Every item had its place. Organization prevented mistakes, and mistakes in the desert could be fatal. "You really think you can handle this?" The question came from the bunk next to hers. The speaker was Jessica Harper, a former college basketball player from Oregon whose athletic build and confident demeanor marked her as someone accustomed to physical success. Elena looked up from organizing her footlocker. "I'm here, same as you." "Yeah, but..." Jessica gestured vaguely at Elena's small frame. "Desert training is brutal. The gear alone weighs more than you probably do. I'm not trying to be mean, but have you really thought this through?" It wasn't hostility in Jessica's voice, just genuine concern mixed with skepticism. Elena had heard that tone countless times before. "I've thought it through," Elena replied evenly, returning to her task. "I grew up working in heat like this. I'll be fine." Jessica exchanged glances with another recruit, a silent conversation that Elena didn't need to hear to understand. They thought she was delusional, setting herself up for humiliating failure. They'd learn, otherwise, soon enough. 14 minutes later, Elena was the first person standing in formation on the training ground, her PT uniform already dark with sweat, but her breathing steady and her posture perfect. The desert sun hammered down without mercy, and she could feel it pulling moisture from her body with every passing second. But she had learned long ago how to exist in this heat, how to become part of the environment rather than fighting against it. Cruz emerged from the training office, his eyes immediately noting that Elena had been first to formation. He said nothing, but something shifted in his expression, a flicker of curiosity quickly suppressed. As the other recruits assembled, several of them already breathing heavily from the simple act of standing in formation, Cruz began his first real lesson. "Welcome to the desert," he said, his voice carrying a note that might have been satisfaction or cruelty. It was impossible to tell which. "For the next 12 weeks, this environment will be your enemy and your teacher. It will find every weakness you possess and exploit it without mercy. Some of you will break, some of you will quit, and a few of you might actually learn something." His gaze swept across the formation again, lingering briefly on several recruits before settling once more on Elena Reyes, he called out suddenly. Elena snapped to attention. "Yes, drill sergeant. Front and center." Elena moved with controlled precision to stand directly in front of Cruz, fully aware that every eye in the formation was now on her. The drill sergeant studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You weigh what, about 115 pounds?" Cruz asked. 118, drill sergeant. 118 pounds, Cruz repeated, loud enough for everyone to hear. Full combat load with water and ammunition is approximately 65 pounds. That's more than half your body weight. You understand that? Yes, drill sergeant. You think you can carry that load 8 miles through desert terrain in this heat? Elena met his gaze directly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Yes, drill sergeant. I know I can. Something flickered in Cruz's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or interest. Most recruits would have hesitated or qualified their answer. Elena had stated it as simple fact. We'll see about that, Cruz said, his tone neutral. Return to formation. As Elena moved back to her position, she could feel the weight of judgment from every direction. The other recruits had just watched her single herself out, make a bold claim, and essentially guarantee that Cruz would be watching her performance with extra scrutiny. Some faces showed sympathy. Others showed anticipation of watching her fail. Elena didn't care about any of it. She had learned years ago that words meant nothing. Only performance mattered, and she would let her performance speak for itself. The first physical training session began immediately, and it was designed to separate those who had prepared from those who had simply shown up. Cruz led them on a 5-mile run through the desert training course, setting a punishing pace that had recruits falling behind within the first mile. Elena ran with the smooth efficiency of someone who understood desert movement. While larger recruits pounded the ground with heavy footfalls that wasted energy, she maintained a lighter stride that conserved strength. While others breathed in ragged gasps that dried their mouths and throats, she kept her breathing controlled and measured, losing minimal moisture to evaporation. By mile 3, the formation had stretched considerably. Several recruits had fallen back to a walk, their faces dangerously red and their movements uncoordinated. Elena remained in the front quarter of the pack, her pace steady and her form still technically sound. Cruz ran at the front, barely sweating despite the heat, his eyes constantly scanning the formation to identify who was struggling and who was thriving. When his gaze fell on Elena, still maintaining her position among much larger recruits, his expression remained carefully neutral, but he was clearly reassessing his initial assumptions. By mile 5, when they finally returned to the training ground, Elena was among the first 15 finishers. She wasn't the fastest, but her performance was undeniably solid. And more importantly, she looked like she could immediately run another 5 miles if ordered to do so. Jessica Harper, who had finished just ahead of Elena, bent over with her hands on her knees, gasping for air. "How are you not dying right now?" she managed to ask between breaths. Elena was breathing heavily, but controlled. "Grew up in this heat. Your body adapts if you spend enough time in it." Cruz called the formation back to attention, his eyes sweeping across the assembled recruits, with the assessment of someone cataloging every weakness and strength. "Some of you performed better than expected," he announced. "Some of lines, you performed worse. Over the next 12 weeks, we will discover who has the mental and physical toughness required for desert operations. This is not about how strong you look, or how confident you feel. This is about who can execute when the environment is actively trying to kill you." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and red, Elena felt a familiar sensation settling into her bones. She was home. This brutal, unforgiving environment was exactly where she belonged, and she would prove it to every person who doubted her, including Drill Sergeant Cruz. What none of them knew, not Cruz, not the other recruits, not even Elena herself, was that within weeks, the desert would present a challenge that would test not just her physical capabilities, but reveal reserves of strength and determination that would redefine what everyone believed was humanly possible. The first week of training separated the prepared from the unprepared with brutal efficiency. Each morning began at 0430 with formation in the pre-dawn darkness, the desert cold enough to make recruits shiver before the sun rose to punish them with opposite extremes. Elena adapted to the rhythm quickly, her internal clock already calibrated for early mornings from years of ranch work. The obstacle course at Fort Irwin was specifically designed for desert warfare training, featuring challenges that simulated real combat conditions. Walls to scale while carrying equipment, rope climbs that tested grip strength diminished by sweat and sand, and low crawls through simulated minefields where the ground temperature could reach 140 degrees by midday. Elena approached each obstacle with methodical precision, studying how other recruits attempted them before her turn came. She watched the mistakes that size and strength couldn't compensate for: poor technique, wasted motion, inefficient approaches that burned energy uselessly. When her turn came on the rope climb, a 30-foot vertical challenge that had already defeated a dozen recruits, Elena used a technique her father had taught her for climbing windmill towers on the ranch. Instead of trying to muscle her way up with pure arm strength like the larger recruits, she used a footlock method that engaged her legs and core, turning the climb into a systematic process rather than a strength contest. She reached the top and rang the bell faster than anyone her size had any right to, drawing surprised murmurs from the watching recruits. "Did you see that?" someone whispered. "She made it look easy." But not everyone was impressed. Private Marcus Bennett, a 6'2" former college football player from Texas, had positioned himself as the alpha among the male recruits. He had size, strength, and the kind of natural athletic ability that had carried him through every physical challenge he'd faced in his life. He also had an ego that couldn't tolerate being shown up by someone he considered inferior. "Cute. Party trick, Reyes," Bennett called out as Elena descended. "Let's see you do that." Carrying actual combat weight. Cruz, who had been observing from nearby, turned his attention to Bennett. "You have something to say, Private?" Bennett straightened slightly, recognizing he'd drawn the drill sergeant's attention. "Just pointing out that climbing a rope without gear isn't the same as actual combat conditions, drill sergeant." "Is that right?" Cruz's voice carried a dangerous edge. "You think Reyes needs your instruction on what constitutes realistic training?" "No, drill sergeant, I just—" "Then shut your mouth and focus on your own performance. Reyes just completed that climb faster than you did with better technique. When you can match her efficiency, then you can offer commentary." Bennett's face flushed red, but whether from heat, embarrassment, or anger was impossible to determine. The rebuke was public and absolute, and Elena could feel the dynamics in the training group shifting. She had just become a target. That evening in the mess hall, the tensions came to a head. Elena sat with Jessica Harper and 2 other female recruits, discussing the day's training and comparing notes on desert survival techniques. The atmosphere was collegial until Bennett and 3 of his friends took seats at the adjacent table. "Must be nice being teacher's pet," Bennett said, loud enough to ensure Elena heard him. "Cruz goes easy on the diversity hires. Makes the stats look good." Elena continued eating, refusing to engage. Her father had taught her that bullies fed on reactions, and the best response was excellence that spoke louder than words. "I'm serious," Bennett continued, warming to his theme now that he had an audience. "She gets praised for doing the bare minimum while the rest of us are held to actual standards. It's embarrassing to watch." Jessica Harper set down her fork with enough force to make a sharp sound against the tray. "You finished behind her on," end quote, "the obstacle course." Bennett. "Behind her on the 5-mile run. Behind her on equipment assembly. So either she's exceeding standards, or you're failing to meet them. Which is it?" Bennett's expression darkened. "The courses are easier when you weigh nothing. She's not carrying the same loads we are. Put real weight on her back and she'll fold like everyone expects. Want to test that theory?" The words were out of Elena's mouth before she fully considered them, her tone quiet but carrying absolute conviction. The mess hall seemed to go silent, though in reality only their immediate area had stopped to watch the confrontation unfold. Bennett leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, actually, I do. Let's do the ruck march course tomorrow. Full combat load, 65 pounds minimum. See how far you make it before you're begging to quit." Cruz's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Unless I'm mistaken, I don't remember authorizing any of you to schedule training exercises." The drill sergeant had appeared from the serving line, his tray in hand, and his expression suggesting he'd heard every word of the exchange. "Drill sergeant, I was just—" Bennett began. "You were just running your mouth when you should have been focusing on refueling your body for tomorrow's training." Cruz interrupted. "But since you're so eager for additional physical challenges, you and Reyes will both report to the equipment shed at 0530 tomorrow. You'll each draw a standard combat load, and you'll run the desert qualification course under my observation." Bennett's confident smile faltered slightly. "Drill sergeant, you didn't mean to volunteer for extra training at 0530, because that's what I heard. Reyes, you have any objection to demonstrating your capabilities under observed conditions?" Elena met Cruz's gaze steadily. "No, drill sergeant. No objection. Outstanding. Both of you finish your meals and get adequate rest. Tomorrow morning we discover if Private Bennett's confidence is justified or if he's been writing checks his body can't cash." As Cruz moved away to his own table, Elena returned to her meal with the same calm focus she brought to everything else. But inside, her heart was racing. She had just committed to a public test that would either validate her presence here or provide ammunition to everyone who doubted she belonged. Jessica leaned closer, her voice low. "Elena, that course is 12 miles through soft sand and rock formations. In full gear. Even the best athletes struggle with it." "I know," Elena replied quietly. "But he would have kept pushing until something like this happened anyway." Better to settle it now. What Elena didn't share was that she had been preparing for exactly this kind of challenge her entire life. Her father's ranch covered thousands of acres of terrain, nearly identical to Fort Irwin's desert environment. She had spent countless hours traversing similar landscapes in heat that matched or exceeded training conditions, often carrying fence posts, water jugs, or equipment that weighed as much as military gear. The other recruits didn't know that desert efficiency was something she understood on an instinctive level, written into muscle memory through years of practical experience. They saw her size and made assumptions about her capabilities. Tomorrow, those assumptions would be tested against reality. That night, as Elena lay in her bunk, she thought about her father's words the day she left for basic training. Mija, people will always doubt you because you don't look like their idea of strong. But the desert doesn't care what you look like. It only cares whether you understand it. And you understand it better than anyone I've ever known. Tomorrow, she would prove he was right. The alarm sounded at 0500, giving Elena 30 minutes to prepare for the challenge that would define how the rest of her training company viewed her. She dressed quickly, noting that several other recruits were also awake, clearly planning to witness the upcoming confrontation. Word had spread through the barracks, and the test had taken on significance beyond just two recruits settling a dispute. Elena arrived at the equipment shed at 0525, 5 minutes early. To her surprise, Cruz was already there, along with two other drill instructors who would serve as observers and safety personnel for the exercise. The desert pre-dawn air was cold enough to see breath, though Elena knew that within hours the temperature would climb past 110 degrees. Bennett arrived at exactly 0530, his confident stride suggesting he had no doubts about the outcome. Several of his friends had followed at a distance, positioning themselves to watch the course from various vantage points. Cruz gestured to two rucksacks that had been prepared and weighed. Standard combat loads, 65 pounds each, verified and sealed. You'll run the desert qualification course, which is 12 miles through mixed terrain. Water stations are positioned at miles 4 and 8. You are authorized to drink but not to rest for more than 60 seconds at each station. He paused, his eyes moving between Elena and Bennett with an expression that revealed nothing. This is not a race. This is an evaluation of your ability to maintain combat effectiveness while carrying standard loads through desert conditions. I will be observing your form, your efficiency, and your decision-making throughout the course. Your objective is to complete the 12 miles, while maintaining capability to engage in combat operations upon arrival. Elena hefted her rucksack, feeling the familiar weight settle onto her shoulders and hips. The load distribution was good, and the pack had been properly configured for desert movement. She adjusted the straps with practiced efficiency, making minor modifications that would prevent chafing and optimize weight balance. Cruz noticed her adjustments, his eyes narrowing slightly. Where did you learn ruck configuration, Reyes? My father taught me, drill sergeant. We used similar packs for carrying equipment across our ranch. Different purpose, same principles. Your father military? No, drill sergeant. Ranch foreman in New Mexico. But he understood desert work. Cruz nodded slowly, then turned to address both recruits. You will move out in 60 seconds. Remember, this is not about who finishes first. This is about who maintains combat effectiveness throughout. Begin your final preparations. Elena took a long drink from her water bottle, then secured it in her pack. She had learned from her father that pre-hydration was critical for desert endurance. Most people waited until they felt thirsty, by which point dehydration had already begun affecting performance. She also took a moment to study the route ahead, visible in the growing dawn light. The course began on relatively flat terrain, but soon climbed into rocky formations that would require careful navigation. The middle section crossed an area of soft sand that would sap energy from every step. The final miles descended back toward the base through a series of narrow canyons where heat would concentrate and become oppressive. Bennett, meanwhile, was stretching aggressively and rolling his shoulders. The physical preparation of someone who relied primarily on strength and athletic ability. He caught Elena watching and offered a confident smirk. Last chance to back out, Reyes. No shame in admitting this is beyond your capabilities. Elena's response was delivered in a tone so calm it was almost conversational. I'll see you at the finish line, Bennett. Move out. Cruz's command sent both recruits forward into the desert dawn. Bennett immediately established a strong pace, his long strides eating up ground with the confidence of someone who had never failed a physical challenge. Elena settled into a completely different rhythm, her steps shorter but more efficient, her breathing controlled, and her posture adjusted to minimize energy expenditure. Within the first mile, the difference in their approaches became apparent to the observing drill instructors. Bennett was running with aggressive determination, attacking the course as he would attack any opponent. Elena was moving with the patient efficiency of someone who understood that desert challenges weren't won through force, but through intelligent energy management. She's going to get left behind. One of the observing instructors commented to Cruz. Keep watching, Cruz replied, his expression thoughtful. By mile 2, Bennett had opened up a significant lead, perhaps a quarter-mile ahead of Elena. But careful observers would have noticed that his breathing had already become labored, and his pace was showing the first signs of inconsistency. The combat load was beginning to affect his stride. Elena, meanwhile, maintained her steady pace without variation. Her breathing remained controlled, her posture still technically sound, and her foot placement showed the kind of tactical awareness that came from navigating difficult terrain countless times before. The third mile brought the first real test, a rocky incline that required both carrying the heavy pack and scrambling over boulder formations. Bennett attacked it with characteristic aggression, using his strength to power through the obstacle. But his technique was inefficient, wasting energy on movements that didn't contribute to forward progress. Elena approached the same formation with calculated precision. She had spent years climbing similar rock formations on her family's ranch, learning which routes minimized effort and which rocks would support weight reliably. She moved through the obstacle with fluid efficiency, actually closing some of the gap Bennett had opened. Cruz, who had taken a vehicle to various observation points along the course, watched Elena navigate the rocks, spoke into his radio to the other instructors. Notice her route selection. She's reading the terrain like someone who grew up in it. By mile 4, when they reached the first water station, Bennett arrived 45 seconds before Elena. He was breathing heavily, his face flushed red, and sweat poured from him despite the morning temperature still being relatively mild. He drank deeply, consuming most of his allotted water in desperate gulps. Elena arrived looking tired but controlled. She drank methodically, taking measured sips that would hydrate effectively without overwhelming her system. She also used part of her 60-second stop to adjust her pack straps, making minor modifications that would prevent problems over the remaining miles. You're falling behind, Reyes, Bennett said between gasps for air. Ready to quit yet? Elena simply looked at him, noted the signs of overexertion in his breathing and movement, and returned to her water. She understood something Bennett didn't. The race was far from over, and the desert always punished those who started too aggressively. Move out. Cruz's command sent them back onto the course, and Bennett immediately surged ahead again, clearly determined to maintain his lead and make it as demoralizing as possible for Elena. But something had changed. Elena had spent the first 4 miles studying Bennett's patterns, understanding his strengths and weaknesses. Now, she would demonstrate what desert wisdom really meant. The 5th and 6th miles crossed an expanse of soft sand that looked innocuous but would prove to be the most challenging terrain on the entire course. Each step sank several inches, requiring extra energy to extract feet and maintain forward momentum. This was the section where races were won or lost, where those who had burned too much energy early would pay the price. Bennett's pace began to deteriorate almost immediately upon entering the sand. His powerful stride, which had been an advantage on firm ground, became a liability in the soft terrain. Each step required excessive energy to pull his foot free, and his heavy breathing became audible even from a distance. Elena adjusted her approach without hesitation. She shortened her stride even further, placing her feet carefully to minimize how deeply they sank. She maintained a rhythm that looked slower but was actually more efficient, covering ground steadily while conserving energy. By the halfway point through the sand crossing, Elena had closed the gap to less than 100 yards. By the end of the 6th mile, she was only 50 yards behind Bennett, and the difference in their conditions was becoming impossible to ignore. Cruz watched from his observation vehicle, his expression revealing something that might have been satisfaction or vindication. "Drill Sergeant Morrison, what's your assessment?" he asked one of the other instructors. "Bennett is in trouble," Morrison replied. "He's burning out. His pace has dropped by at least 30%, and his form is deteriorating. Reyes, on the other hand, looks like she's running the same pace she started with. It's remarkable. Actually, it's not remarkable if you understand desert operations," Cruz said quietly. "Reyes isn't trying to dominate the course. She's trying to work with it. That's the difference between someone who thinks they're tough and someone who actually is tough." The next 2 miles would prove Cruz's assessment correct in ways that would surprise everyone watching and reveal just a fraction of Elena's true capabilities. The real test, the one that would change everything, was still weeks away, waiting in the desert heat, like fate itself. The 7th mile of the desert qualification course brought Bennett to his breaking point. Elena watched from a distance as his once confident stride deteriorated into something barely recognizable as running. His pack had shifted on his shoulders, throwing off his center of gravity, and he was now leaning forward at an angle that would cause serious back problems if maintained much longer. By mile 8, at the second water station, Elena arrived to find Bennett already there, bent over with his hands on his knees, gasping for air in a way that suggested he was approaching heat exhaustion. His face had gone from red to an alarming pale color, and his hands trembled as he tried to lift his water bottle. Cruz was already at the water station, his experienced eyes assessing Bennett's condition with concern. "Bennett, you need to pull yourself together. Your form has completely broken down." "I'm fine, Drill Sergeant," Bennett managed between ragged breaths, but he clearly wasn't fine. Elena arrived, her breathing elevated but controlled, her movements still efficient and purposeful. She took her allotted water and observed Bennett carefully, recognizing the signs her father had taught her to watch for. The pale skin despite heat, the trembling hands, the confused look in his eyes. "Drill Sergeant," Elena said quietly, "Private Bennett is showing signs of heat exhaustion. He needs medical attention and cooling, not more exercise." Cruz had already reached the same conclusion. "Bennett, you're done. Drill Sergeant Morrison will transport you back to base for medical evaluation." "No," Bennett protested weakly. "I can finish. I just need—" "That wasn't a request. Private. You've pushed beyond safe limits. There's no shame in recognizing when conditions have exceeded your capabilities." As Bennett was helped into the transport vehicle, Elena prepared to continue alone. She had 4 miles remaining, and while she was tired, she felt strong enough to complete the course. The morning sun was now fully above the horizon, pushing temperatures toward triple digits, but she had trained in worse. "Reyes," Cruz said, his voice carrying a note she hadn't heard before, something that might have been respect. "You've proven your point. Bennett couldn't finish, and you're maintaining good form. You can ride back with him if you want. The evaluation is complete." Elena adjusted her pack straps and took a final drink from her water bottle. "With respect, Drill Sergeant, I'd like to finish the course. Not to prove anything to anyone else, but to know I can do it." Cruz studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Outstanding. I'll meet you at the finish line. Maintain your pace, stay aware of your body's signals, and don't let pride push you past safety limits." "Yes, Drill Sergeant." As Elena moved out for the final 4 miles, Cruz watched her disappearing into the desert landscape with an expression that mixed approval with something else, a kind of recognition that came from seeing someone who genuinely understood the environment they were operating in. The 9th and 10th miles took Elena through a series of narrow canyons where the rock walls concentrated heat like an oven. Temperature readings in these sections could exceed 120 degrees by midday, and the lack of airflow made every breath feel like inhaling fire. This was where the course became genuinely dangerous, where even well-prepared soldiers could succumb to heat injury if they didn't manage their effort carefully. Elena slowed her pace slightly, recognizing that the concentrated heat required adjustments to maintain safety. She wetted her neck with water from her bottle, using evaporative cooling to help regulate her body temperature. She focused on breathing through her nose when possible, reducing moisture loss and keeping her mouth from drying out completely. She was approaching the halfway point of the canyon section when she heard something that made her stop completely. A voice calling for help, faint and strained, echoing off the rock walls in a way that made it difficult to determine direction. Elena stood perfectly still, controlling her breathing so she could listen more carefully. There it was, again, definitely someone calling out, the voice carrying pain and desperation. "Hello?" Elena called back. "Where are you? Keep talking so I can locate you." The response was weaker this time, but Elena's desert-trained ears caught enough to determine direction. The voice was coming from a side canyon approximately 50 yards off the main course route, an area that should have been empty during the training exercise. Elena knew the protocol. Stay on course. Complete the mission. Report anomalies to command when you reach the next checkpoint. Investigating unknown situations alone was against every safety regulation the Army had established. But the voice called out again, and this time Elena recognized something in it that made her decision immediate. That was Drill Sergeant Cruz's voice, and he was in serious trouble. Elena moved toward the side canyon at a controlled run, her training pack bouncing against her back but her focus absolute. She had to navigate around a rocky outcrop to reach the area where the voice originated. And when she finally had a clear view, what she saw sent ice through her veins, despite the brutal heat. Cruz was lying at the base of a 20-foot rock face, his body positioned at an angle that suggested he had fallen from above. His left leg was twisted beneath him in a way that was obviously wrong, and blood stained the sand around his head. His vehicle was visible about 100 yards away, parked where he must have left it to get a closer observation point for Elena's run through the canyons. "Drill Sergeant." Elena dropped to her knees beside him, immediately beginning the medical assessment her training had taught her. ABC. Airway. Breathing. Circulation. Cruz's eyes opened, unfocused and confused. "Reyes? What? How did you? I heard you calling." "Drill Sergeant." "Stay still while I check for injuries." "Was climbing to get better vantage point," Cruz said, his words slightly slurred. Rock gave way. Fell. Elena's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking for head trauma, spinal injury, bleeding. The head wound was serious but not immediately. Life-threatening scalp wounds always bled dramatically. The leg, however, was definitely broken, possibly in multiple places. She could see bone fragments pressing against the skin, a compound fracture that required immediate medical intervention. "Can you feel your toes, Drill Sergeant?" Elena asked while pulling medical supplies from her pack. "Yeah. Hurts like hell, but I can feel everything." That was good news. It suggested the spinal column wasn't damaged. But Cruz was in no condition to walk, and Elena realized with growing concern that they were in a serious situation. They were approximately 2 miles from the nearest road where vehicles could access, in a location that was off the main course route where other personnel wouldn't be looking for them. And Cruz's vehicle was too far away to be useful even if Elena could have operated it. She pulled out her radio to call for emergency support, but the narrow canyon walls were blocking the signal completely. She tried multiple frequencies, repositioning herself to different locations, but couldn't establish communication. The rock formations that made this excellent training terrain also made it a communications dead zone. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. Cruz was watching her attempts with increasing clarity as his initial confusion from the head injury began fading. No signal? No. Drill Sergeant. The canyon walls are blocking everything. Cruz closed his eyes briefly, and Elena could see him running through options in his mind. When he opened them again, his voice was steadier, the tone of command returning despite his injuries. Reyes, you need to continue to the finish line. Once you reach the final checkpoint, they'll have communications equipment. You can call for medical evacuation from there. Elena was already shaking her head before he finished speaking. Drill Sergeant, with respect, that's at least 45 minutes at best pace, plus time for medical teams to reach this location. Your head injury could be serious. That leg needs immediate stabilization, and the temperature is going to hit 120 degrees within the next hour. That's not your call to make, Private, Cruz said, but his voice lacked conviction. He understood the medical realities as well as Elena did. Elena finished bandaging Cruz's head wound and began carefully examining his leg. The break was bad. She could see at least 2 separate fracture points, and the compound nature of the injury meant bone had punctured through muscle and was threatening to break skin. Moving him incorrectly could cause catastrophic damage to blood vessels and nerves. But leaving him here while she ran for help meant leaving him immobilized in a location where temperatures would become life-threatening within hours. Cruz was a big man, well over 200 pounds of muscle, and he had already lost blood from the head wound. His body's ability to regulate temperature would be compromised. Elena looked at Cruz's vehicle in the distance, then back at the drill sergeant who had spent weeks training her, who had doubted her initially but had been fair when her performance proved him wrong. The man who was lying injured because he had been observing her qualification run, ensuring she was safe while she completed her challenge. The decision formed in her mind with absolute clarity, even as she recognized how impossible the task would be. She was 118 pounds. Cruz was at least 210 pounds with his equipment. The distance to his vehicle was manageable, maybe 100 yards, but the terrain was soft sand and rocky ground that would make every step a battle. And more importantly, even if she could get him to the vehicle, she would then need to get him out of this canyon system to somewhere vehicles could access and where radio communications would work. That meant navigating at least 2 miles through the same brutal desert terrain she had just been running through. Except now she would be carrying a full-grown man who outweighed her by nearly 100 pounds. It was impossible. Every logical calculation said it couldn't be done. Elena looked at Cruz and saw him watching her, and she knew he understood exactly what she was considering. She saw him preparing to order her not to attempt it, to follow protocol, and go for help, to leave him here, because that was the rational choice. She started fashioning a carrying harness before he could speak. Reyes, that's an order. You cannot carry me 2 miles through the desert. The math doesn't work. You'll hurt yourself, or worse, and then we'll both need rescue. Elena's hands continued working, using rope from her pack, webbing from Cruz's tactical vest, and techniques her father had taught her for creating emergency carrying systems on the ranch. Drill Sergeant, my father weighs 200 pounds. When he injured his back 3 years ago during calving season, we were 4 miles from the house in terrain just like this. I carried him 3 of those 4 miles before my brother found us with the truck. Cruz stared at her. You're serious? Yes, Drill Sergeant. I've done this before in heat worse than this. I know my capabilities, and I know this terrain. I can get you to your vehicle, and then I can get you to where medical teams can reach us. Reyes, even if you could carry me that far, and I'm not conceding that you can, the risk is enormous. If you fail halfway through, we're both in worse position than we are now. Elena finished the harness system and began the delicate process of stabilizing Cruz's broken leg using materials from both their medical kits. Her hands moved with confidence born from practical experience, not just classroom training. Drill Sergeant, Cruz, you've spent the last 2 weeks evaluating whether I have what it takes to serve in desert operations. You've tested my physical conditioning, my technical skills, and my decision-making under pressure. Now I'm going to show you what all of that really means. She met his eyes directly, her voice carrying absolute conviction. I can do this. I know I can do this. The only question is whether you're going to let your assumptions about what's possible stop you from accepting help from someone who's actually qualified to provide it. Cruz held her gaze for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. He had spent his career making rapid assessments of personnel capabilities under pressure, and what he saw in Elena's eyes wasn't bravado or reckless confidence. It was genuine competence backed by experience. "How's the harness system work?" he asked quietly, and Elena knew she had won the argument. "It distributes your weight across my shoulders, back, and hips, similar to how a properly fitted rucksack works. Your injured leg will be positioned so it's not taking any weight or experiencing movement that could worsen the fracture. I'll secure your head so the injury site isn't subjected to bouncing or impact." She paused, making final adjustments to the system. "The key is that I'm not trying to carry your entire weight with my arms or shoulders. I'm using my skeletal structure and core strength to support the load, with my legs providing the movement. It's the same principle behind how smaller people can carry heavy packs long distances. It's about efficiency and weight distribution, not raw strength." Cruz nodded slowly. "And the heat management? We'll move in intervals. 10 minutes of movement, 2 minutes of rest, in any shade we can find. I'll monitor both our conditions constantly. If at any point I determine I can't continue safely, we stop and I go for help. But drill sergeant, I genuinely believe I can do this." "All right, Reyes, let's see what you're made of." As Elena began the process of securing Cruz into the carrying harness, both of them understood that the next hours would test her capabilities in ways that no formal training exercise ever could. The desert qualification course she had been running was designed to be challenging but manageable. What she was about to attempt was something else entirely, a feat that would require every ounce of strength, endurance, and determination she possessed. The temperature gauge on Cruz's watch read 114 degrees and climbing. Elena took a final drink of water, adjusted the harness one last time, and prepared to lift a weight that everyone would have said was impossible for someone her size to carry even 100 yards, let alone 2 miles through brutal terrain. "On 3, drill sergeant. 1, 2, 3. The weight that settled onto Elena's frame was staggering, overwhelming, almost crushing in its immediate impact. For a terrifying moment, her knees threatened to buckle before she even took a single step. But she had been here before, had felt this same impossible pressure when carrying her father through New Mexico heat, and she knew that the first moments were always the worst. She forced her legs to lock, her core to engage, her entire body to accept the burden it now carried. Then, impossibly, she took her first step forward, beginning a journey that would redefine what everyone, including herself, believed was humanly possible. The first 100 yards to Cruz's vehicle nearly destroyed Elena's resolve completely. Every step felt like moving through quicksand with an anchor tied to her back. The harness system worked as designed, distributing Cruz's weight across her frame. But no amount of clever engineering could change the fundamental reality. She was carrying nearly twice her own body weight through soft sand and temperatures that were approaching 120 degrees. Cruz remained silent during those initial steps, understanding that Elena needed to concentrate absolutely on the mechanics of movement. He could feel her body trembling under the strain, could sense the enormous effort each step required, and he found himself mentally calculating how far she might actually make it before physics and physiology won out over determination. 50 yards. That was his estimate. Maybe 75, if she was truly exceptional. There was simply no way someone her size could sustain this level of exertion for any meaningful distance. But Elena had learned something during years of ranch work that most people never discovered. The human body was capable of far more than the mind believed possible. The key was breaking impossible tasks into smaller, manageable goals and refusing to think beyond the immediate next step. One step, then another, then another. Not thinking about the vehicle ahead, not thinking about the 2 miles beyond that. Just the next single step, executed with as much efficiency as she could maintain. By the time They reached Cruz's vehicle. Elena's shirt was completely soaked with sweat, and her breathing had become labored. But she had covered the distance, and more importantly, she had established a rhythm that felt sustainable, at least for the short term. She carefully lowered Cruz to the ground in the vehicle's shadow, the only available shade in the immediate area. The temperature differential was minimal, maybe 5 degrees cooler than direct sunlight, but even that small relief was valuable. 2 minutes rest, Elena said, her voice strained but controlled. Drink water. Check your condition. Cruz was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Reyes, you just carried me 100 yards through soft sand. In this heat. That's not normal. Elena was checking Cruz's leg splint, ensuring it hadn't shifted during the carry. Grew up doing this kind of work, drill sergeant. My father's ranch covers 12,000 acres of terrain, almost identical to this. Emergency situations require emergency responses. She pulled out Cruz's vehicle radio, hoping that even though they were still in a communications dead zone, the more powerful transmitter might have better range than their personal radios. She tried multiple frequencies, but got only static in response. We're still blocked by the canyon walls, Cruz observed. Reyes, there's a service road approximately 2 miles east of here that vehicles can access. If you can get me there. Medical teams could reach us within 20 minutes of receiving a call. Elena studied their position, mentally mapping the terrain between their current location and the service road Cruz mentioned. She knew the area from studying course maps. 2 miles through a mix of rocky canyon floors and soft sand, with minimal shade and temperatures that were still climbing. Under normal circumstances, a 2-mile hike through that terrain would be moderately challenging but entirely manageable. Carrying 210 pounds of injured soldier made it something else entirely. A test of human limits that seemed designed to fail. I can make it, Elena said simply, and Cruz heard in her voice the same absolute conviction she had demonstrated when promising she could handle the initial carry to the vehicle. I know you believe that, Cruz replied carefully. But Reyes, be realistic. You've already pushed beyond what should be possible. There's no shame in recognizing limits. I can wait here in the shade while you run to the service road and bring back help. Elena was already preparing to lift Cruz back into the carrying harness, checking each connection point and adjusting for the longer journey ahead. Drill sergeant, with respect, you've lost blood from your head injury. You're showing early signs of shock. Your body's ability to regulate temperature is compromised. Leaving you here, for the hour plus it would take me to run for help and bring teams back, means leaving you in conditions that could become critical. She met his eyes directly. I didn't carry you this far to leave you now. We're both getting to that service road. Together. Cruz found himself unable to argue with her logic, partly because she was medically correct, but mostly because he was witnessing something he had rarely seen in 2 decades of military service. Someone who genuinely understood their own capabilities, without bravado or self-delusion. All right, he said quietly. But Reyes, if at any point you feel like you can't continue safely, you tell me immediately. That's an order. Yes, drill sergeant. As Elena prepared to lift Cruz again, she allowed herself one moment of honest assessment. Her shoulders already ached from the 100-yard carry. Her legs felt heavy from the 10 miles she had already run that morning. The heat was becoming genuinely dangerous, not just uncomfortable. And she was about to attempt something that by any objective measure should be impossible. But she had learned from her father that sometimes the only way to discover what you were truly capable of was to attempt the things others said couldn't be done. On 3, she said, positioning herself beneath the harness. 1, 2, 3. The weight settled onto her frame with the same crushing impact, but this time Elena was prepared for it. She locked her knees, engaged her core, and found her center of balance. Then she took her first step toward the service road, beginning a journey that would push her far beyond any limit she had previously tested. The terrain leading out of the canyon system was treacherous, a mix of loose rocks that could turn an ankle and patches of soft sand that sucked at her boots with every step. Elena moved with careful deliberation, placing each foot precisely and testing weight-bearing before committing fully to a step. Cruz remained mostly silent, understanding that conversation required breath Elena couldn't spare. But he found himself constantly amazed by her movement efficiency. Where most people would have tried to power through obstacles with brute force, Elena navigated around them, choosing paths that minimized effort even if they added slight distance. After 20 minutes of movement, Elena stopped in the shadow of a large boulder, carefully lowering Cruz and immediately checking his vital signs. His pulse was elevated but strong. His skin was hot, but not alarmingly so. The head wound had stopped bleeding, and the leg splint remained secure. "How are you doing, Drill Sergeant?" she asked, while taking measured sips from her water bottle. "Leg hurts. Head aches. But I'm stable. More importantly, how are you doing? And, I want an honest assessment, not what you think I want to hear." Elena considered the question seriously. "My shoulders are burning, and my legs are fatigued from this morning's run. But I'm not experiencing any signs of heat exhaustion. My breathing is controlled, and I feel capable of continuing. We're about a quarter-mile from the edge of the canyon system. Once we reach open desert, the terrain will be easier, and I'll be able to move faster." What Elena didn't mention was that her entire body was screaming in protest. That every muscle fiber felt like it was tearing. That the weight on her shoulders felt like it was compressing her spine with each step. These sensations were real. But they weren't limits, they were just discomfort. And she had learned long ago how to function through discomfort. 2 minutes, she announced. And then they were moving again. They emerged from the canyon system approximately 40 minutes after beginning the journey. The open desert ahead looked like something from another planet. Endless stretches of sand and rock shimmering in heat that made the air itself seem to ripple and dance. In the distance, perhaps a mile and a half away, Elena could see the service road Cruz had mentioned, a thin line of graded dirt cutting through the landscape. She adjusted her grip on the fated harness and continued forward, her pace slightly faster now that the terrain was more consistent. Her legs had found a rhythm that felt almost automatic, a steady cadence that covered ground without thinking about individual steps. Cruz, experiencing the journey from Elena's back, found himself alternating between amazement at what she was accomplishing and guilt that his injury was requiring it. He was a drill sergeant. Someone whose job was to build soldiers' capabilities through training and discipline. The role reversal, being dependent on a recruit for his safety, challenged every assumption he held about military hierarchies and physical capabilities. "Reyes," he said after another 20 minutes of movement, his voice quiet but clear. "When we get back to base, when this is all over, I owe you an apology." Elena didn't break her stride, but Cruz could feel her attention shift slightly. "For what, Drill Sergeant?" "For doubting you. For seeing your size instead of your capabilities. For assuming that physical strength was more important than efficiency, determination, and intelligence." Elena was silent for several steps before responding. "You weren't wrong to doubt me initially, Drill Sergeant. On paper, I don't fit the profile of someone who can succeed in desert operations. But paper doesn't account for experience, preparation, or the refusal to accept limitations others try to impose." They moved in silence for another 10 minutes, covering ground that was bringing them closer to salvation with each step. The service road was now clearly visible, and Elena could see what looked like a vehicle parked along it in the distance, probably another training group using the area. "We're going to make it," Cruz said, and Elena could hear surprise in his voice, as if he was only now truly believing it was possible. "Yes, Drill Sergeant. We are." The final half-mile to the service road became a test of pure will. Elena's body had moved beyond simple fatigue into a state where each step required conscious command. Her legs no longer seemed to respond automatically, and her vision had narrowed into a tunnel that focused exclusively on the ground ahead. The weight on her shoulders felt like it had doubled, and her breathing had become ragged despite her best efforts at control. But she had carried her father 3 miles through similar terrain when she was 17 years old. She had spent years learning how to push past the point where her body said to stop. And most importantly, she had promised Cruz that she would get both of them to safety. And Elena Reyes did not break promises. 50 yards from the road, Cruz saw the parked vehicle start moving, driving slowly in their direction. Someone had spotted them. 20 yards from the road, Elena could hear voices calling out. Could see people running toward them with equipment and medical supplies. 10 yards from the road, Elena knew with absolute certainty that she had accomplished something extraordinary. Something that would change how everyone viewed her capabilities and how she viewed herself. At the road's edge, as multiple hands reached out to help lower Cruz safely to the ground, Elena finally allowed herself to collapse to her knees. Her mission complete and her limits thoroughly tested but not exceeded. Medical personnel swarmed around Cruz immediately, but he kept his eyes on Elena, watching as she knelt in the sand, her body trembling from exertion, her face streaked with sweat and dust, looking like she had just survived a battle which, in a very real sense, she had. "That recruit," Cruz said to the medic working on his leg, his voice carrying absolute conviction, "just carried me 2 miles through the desert in 120-degree heat. I weigh 212 pounds. She weighs maybe 120. And she never stopped, never complained, never suggested this might be beyond her capabilities." The medic glanced at Elena, then back at Cruz with clear skepticism. "Sir, that's not really possible. The weight ratio alone." "I don't care what's theoretically possible," Cruz interrupted. "I'm telling you what just happened. Reyes, get over here and let medical check you for heat injury." Elena rose shakily to her feet and moved to where the medics had established their triage area. As they began examining her for signs of heat exhaustion, dehydration, or muscle damage, word of what had occurred was already spreading through radio communications to base command. Within an hour, the story would reach training command headquarters. Within 2 hours, senior officers would be requesting detailed reports. And within a day, Elena Reyes would find herself at the center of attention that would fundamentally change not just her military career, but perspectives on human capability itself. But for now, as she accepted water from a medic and felt the adrenaline finally beginning to wear off, Elena simply felt grateful that she had been able to help someone who needed it. The rest, the recognition, the amazement, the inevitable questions about how she had accomplished something that shouldn't have been possible, all of that could wait. She had carried Drill Sergeant Cruz to safety through impossible conditions. That was what mattered. Everything else was just noise. The base hospital at Fort Irwin buzzed with controlled activity as medical personnel worked on Cruz's injuries. The compound leg fracture would require surgery, and the head wound had needed 12 stitches. But doctors confirmed that Elena's quick action and efficient transportation had likely prevented complications that could have resulted from extended immobilization in extreme heat. Elena sat in the hospital waiting area, having been cleared by medical staff after a thorough examination. She was dehydrated and exhausted, with significant muscle strain in her shoulders and back, but showed no signs of heat exhaustion or serious injury. The doctor who examined her had been openly amazed that someone in her condition had just completed the physical feat described in the incident report. Captain Patricia Morrison, the training officer who had witnessed the beginning of Elena's qualification run, entered the waiting area with an expression that mixed concern and curiosity. "Reyes, how are you feeling?" Elena stood at attention despite her exhaustion. "Tired, ma'am, but fine otherwise." "At ease, Private. Sit down before you fall down." Morrison took a seat across from Elena, studying her carefully. "I need you to walk me through exactly what happened from the moment you heard Drill Sergeant Cruz calling for help. Command wants a complete incident report. And frankly, the details we're getting are hard to believe." Elena recounted the events methodically, describing her decision to investigate the call for help, finding Cruz injured in the side canyon, determining that communications were blocked, and making the choice to carry him to the service road, rather than leave him in dangerous conditions. While she went for help, Morrison listened without interrupting, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification on specific details. When Elena finished, the captain sat back and regarded her with an expression that was difficult to read. You understand that what you're describing is physically remarkable, right? Carrying someone nearly twice your weight for 2 miles through desert terrain in extreme heat. There are trained rescue specialists who would struggle to accomplish that. I understand it sounds unlikely, ma'am, but I grew up doing similar work. Emergency rescues on my family's ranch required carrying injured workers through terrain that was essentially identical to Fort Irwin's environment. This wasn't my first time facing a challenge like this. Before Morrison could respond, the hospital room door opened and Cruz emerged in a wheelchair, his leg immobilized in a temporary cast and his head bandaged, but his expression alert and focused. Captain Morrison, Cruz said, I need to provide my statement about what occurred. Drill Sergeant, you should be resting. With respect, ma'am, this is important. Private Reyes saved my life today through a combination of skill, determination, and capabilities that frankly embarrass every assumption I made about her when she arrived at this training center. Cruz wheeled himself closer, his eyes moving between Morrison and Elena. I needed on record that Reyes's decision-making was sound throughout the entire incident. She correctly assessed that leaving me in that location posed greater risks than attempting the evacuation. She demonstrated advanced knowledge of field medicine, emergency rescue techniques, and heat management protocols. And she accomplished something I would have said was physically impossible. Morrison was making notes, but her expression showed she was still processing the implications. Drill Sergeant, I'm not questioning Private Reyes's actions. I'm trying to understand how someone her size managed to carry you that distance. It defies conventional understanding of human physical limitations. Then conventional understanding is incomplete, Cruz replied flatly. Captain, I felt every step of that journey. I observed her technique, her decision-making, her stress management. What Reyes accomplished wasn't superhuman strength. It was exceptional efficiency, superior training, and mental toughness that allowed her to push far beyond what most people would consider their breaking point. He turned to look at Elena directly. She never complained, never suggested quitting, never acted like what she was doing was impossible. She just executed the mission with the same calm competence I've watched her demonstrate in every training exercise for the past 2 weeks. Morrison closed her notebook and stood. I'll include both your statements in my report to command. Reyes, you should return to your barracks and get rest. You're excused from training activities for the next 48 hours while medical monitors your recovery. Ma'am, I don't need. That wasn't a request. Private, you've just completed an extraordinary physical feat. Your body needs recovery time whether you feel like you need it or not. As Morrison left to file her reports, Cruz gestured for Elena to come closer. When she did, he spoke quietly, his voice carrying a weight that suggested this was more than just a casual conversation. Reyes, what you did today is going to generate a lot of attention. Command will want to understand how you accomplished it. Training specialists will want to study your techniques. And there will be people who try to diminish what you did or explain it away as luck or adrenaline. He paused, making sure she was listening carefully. Don't let anyone convince you that what you did wasn't extraordinary. Don't let anyone tell you it was just luck or circumstances. You saved my life, through skill and determination that most soldiers will never possess. Own that accomplishment. Elena met his gaze steadily. I just did what needed to be done. Drill Sergeant. Anyone in my position would have done the same. Cruz smiled slightly, the first time Elena had ever seen that expression on his face. No, Reyes. They wouldn't have. That's the whole point. Most people would have left me and gone for help, which would have been the safe, expected choice. You chose differently because you understood variables others don't even know exist. That's what makes exceptional soldiers. By evening, word of Elena's rescue had spread throughout Fort Irwin. Recruits who had watched her struggle under Bennett's skepticism now viewed her with something approaching awe. Training instructors who had harbored doubts about whether smaller recruits could handle desert operations found themselves reconsidering fundamental assumptions. Jessica Harper was the first to reach Elena when she returned to the barracks. Is it true? Did you really carry Cruz 2 miles through the desert? Elena was exhausted, both physically and from the constant attention. Yes. He was injured and needed help. I provided it. But how? I mean, I saw you on that qualification run this morning. You were already tired from 10 miles of running with full gear, and then you carried a full-grown man another 2 miles? How is that even possible? Training. Elena replied simply. Experience. And refusing to accept that something can't be done just because it's difficult. Word reached Bennett that evening as well. He was being held for observation due to his heat exhaustion, but he heard about Elena's rescue from medical staff who were still discussing the remarkable event. When he later encountered Elena in the hospital corridor, where she had returned to check on Cruz's condition, he stopped her with an expression that mixed shame and respect. Reyes, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you. Wrong about what matters in a soldier. I let my ego convince me that size and strength were all that counted, and you proved that determination and skill count for more. Elena regarded him steadily. Bennett, you're a strong soldier with good capabilities. You just need to learn that there are different ways to be strong. Today's lesson was hard for both of us, but we both survived it. The incident report that Captain Morrison filed reached Colonel James Hawthorne, Fort Irwin's commanding officer, by 2100 hours. He read it once, then read it again, then called Morrison into his office for clarification. Captain, I need you to confirm these details. Private Reyes, who weighs 118 pounds, carried Drill Sergeant Cruz, who weighs 212 pounds, approximately 2 miles through desert terrain in temperatures exceeding 115 degrees. And she did this after already running 10 miles of the qualification course with full combat load. Yes, sir, I've verified the details with both Reyes and Drill Sergeant Cruz. Medical personnel at the scene confirmed the timeline and distances. Sir, I've served at Fort Irwin for 6 years, and I've never seen anything comparable to this. I'm not sure anyone has. Hawthorne leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. This recruit, who, by conventional metrics, shouldn't be able to carry that weight at all, managed to transport it 2 miles through conditions that represent some of the most challenging terrain we train in. How did she accomplish this? Retry B. Continue. Morrison pulled out her tablet, displaying photos taken by personnel who had arrived at the service road. Sir, from what I can determine from interviews and observation, Reyes utilized an improvised carrying harness that distributed Cruz's weight across her skeletal structure rather than relying on muscle strength alone. More importantly, she grew up working on a ranch in southern New Mexico, terrain and climate nearly identical to Fort Irwin. She has practical experience with desert operations that most recruits won't acquire until after months of training. Hawthorne studied the photos showing Elena's harness system, noting the sophisticated understanding of weight distribution and leverage it demonstrated. This isn't standard training. Where did she learn rescue techniques like this? According to her statement, sir, her father taught her emergency rescue protocols after several incidents on their ranch required evacuating injured workers from remote locations. She's apparently performed similar rescues before, though never under official military observation. The colonel was quiet for a long moment, his experienced mind working through the broader implications. Captain, this incident raises significant questions about how we assess recruit capabilities. If conventional metrics failed to predict Reyes's actual operational effectiveness, how many other qualified candidates are we screening out based on incomplete evaluation criteria? I've been wondering the same thing, sir. Reyes's performance throughout training has been consistently strong, but today's incident reveals capabilities that no standard assessment would have identified. Her combination of practical experience, mental toughness, and technical knowledge created a capability profile that doesn't fit our normal categories. Hawthorne made a decision. I want a complete analysis of this incident prepared for submission to Training Command. Include detailed breakdowns of Reyes's techniques, the environmental conditions, medical assessments, and verified timeline. If what happened today is replicable and teachable, It could revolutionize how we approach emergency rescue operations in desert environments. He paused, then added, "Also, I want to meet with Private Reyes personally tomorrow. Anyone who can accomplish what she did deserves recognition, and I want to understand her perspective on training methods and capability assessment." As Morrison left to execute the colonel's orders, Hawthorne found himself thinking about the broader implications. The military had spent decades refining selection processes designed to identify the strongest, fastest, most physically impressive candidates. But Elena Reyes had just demonstrated that strength came in forms that conventional measurements couldn't capture. The following morning, Elena stood at attention in Colonel Hawthorne's office. Her uniform crisp, despite the muscle soreness that made every movement painful. The colonel studied her with the careful assessment of someone who had commanded thousands of soldiers and developed an instinct for recognizing exceptional individuals. "At ease, Private Reyes. Please, sit down." Hawthorne gestured to a chair across from his desk. "How are you feeling after yesterday's events?" "Sore, sir, but functional. Medical cleared me without restrictions beyond the recommended 48-hour rest period." "Good. I've read Captain Morrison's report, drill, Sergeant Cruz's statement, and the medical assessments. I've also reviewed your performance throughout training. Private Reyes, what you accomplished yesterday was extraordinary by any objective measure. I need you to help me understand something. When you made the decision to carry drill Sergeant Cruz rather than leave him to get help, what was your thought process?" Elena considered the question carefully. "Sir, I performed a tactical assessment of available options and probable outcomes. Leaving drill Sergeant Cruz in his condition, in that location, in those environmental conditions, posed significant medical risks. His head injury could have worsened. Heat exposure could have caused complications. The time required to reach help and return with medical teams meant extended exposure to risk factors." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "Carrying him eliminated those time-dependent risks. Yes, it posed its own challenges. But I had practical experience suggesting I could, to accomplish the task successfully. The decision was based on capability assessment, not bravado or emotional response." Hawthorne nodded slowly. "That's a remarkably mature tactical analysis from a recruit with only 2 weeks of formal military training. Where did you develop that decision-making framework?" "My father, sir. Ranch work involves constant risk assessment: weather, equipment, livestock, terrain. He taught me to evaluate situations based on probable outcomes rather than emotional responses or conventional assumptions." "What's most likely to keep everyone safe?" was his standard question. The colonel leaned forward, his interest clearly engaged. "Private Reyes, I'm going to be direct with you. What you accomplished yesterday challenges some fundamental assumptions about physical capabilities and selection criteria. There are people in training command who will want to understand whether your performance was an anomaly or represents capabilities that could be developed in other soldiers through proper training. Sir, I believe anyone with proper preparation and mental conditioning could accomplish similar feats. My advantage wasn't superhuman strength, it was specific preparation for desert operations and experience with emergency rescue techniques. Those are teachable skills." "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." Hawthorne pulled up a document on his computer. "I'm recommending you for a special training track that focuses on desert operations and emergency rescue protocols. Your practical experience combined with formal military training could make you an exceptional instructor and tactical specialist." Elena felt a surge of emotion but kept her expression neutral. "Sir, I'm honored. But I'm concerned about how this might be perceived. I don't want preferential treatment or special consideration based on one incident. This isn't preferential treatment, Private. This is the military recognizing an individual whose specific skill set and demonstrated capabilities align with critical operational needs." Hawthorne's voice carried absolute conviction. "Reyes, the Army needs soldiers who can think tactically under pressure, who can push beyond conventional limitations, and who can accomplish missions others would consider impossible. You've demonstrated all three qualities. It would be foolish not to develop those capabilities further. Before Elena could respond, there was a knock on the door. Captain Morrison entered, followed by someone Elena hadn't expected to see. Her father, Miguel Reyes, still wearing his ranch work clothes and looking distinctly uncomfortable in the military office environment. "Papa?" Elena stood abruptly, confusion and concern flooding through her. "What are you doing here? Is everything okay?" Miguel Reyes crossed the room and pulled his daughter into a tight hug, his weathered face showing pride and emotion. "Mija, I got a call yesterday from the base commander. They told me what you did. I had to come see for myself that you were okay." Hawthorne stood as well. "Mr. Reyes, thank you for making the journey on short notice. I wanted to meet the man who taught Private Reyes the skills that saved Drill Sergeant Cruz's life. Your daughter's training and preparation were exceptional." Miguel turned to face the colonel, his posture straightening with natural dignity. "Colonel, everything Elena knows about desert work, she learned by doing it. 12 years old. She was helping me rescue a ranch hand who got thrown from a horse 3 miles from headquarters. 14. She carried her younger brother out of an arroyo when flash flooding cut off their path. She's been solving impossible problems her whole life." He looked back at Elena with fierce pride. "I told her when she left for basic training, Mija, they'll doubt you because you're small and you're female. Show them that size doesn't measure strength, and strength doesn't measure heart." "Sounds like that's exactly what you did." Elena felt tears threatening and forced them back. "Papa, I just did what you taught me. Assess the situation. Choose the best option. Execute without hesitation." "That's exactly right," Miguel replied. "And that's why I'm so proud of you." Hawthorne let the moment settle before speaking again. "Mr. Reyes, your daughter has demonstrated capabilities that could significantly impact how the Army approaches desert operations and emergency rescue training. With your permission, I'd like to arrange for you to consult with our training development team. Your practical knowledge combined with our formal military structure could create training protocols that save lives." Miguel looked surprised. "Colonel, I'm just a ranch foreman. I don't know anything about military training. You know about keeping people alive in desert conditions when everything goes wrong. That's exactly the knowledge we need." Hawthorne's voice carried conviction. "Sir, the Army has plenty of experts in military protocol and standard procedures. What we need more of are people who understand practical application under real-world conditions. You've spent 40 years developing that knowledge. We'd be foolish not to learn from it." As the meeting concluded, Elena found herself processing a reality that felt almost surreal. 24 hours earlier, she had been trying to prove she deserved a place in Army training. Now she was being offered advanced training opportunities. Her father was being consulted by senior military officers, and her rescue of Cruz had become a documented incident that would influence future training protocols. But more than any official recognition, what mattered most was the pride in her father's eyes, and the knowledge that she had saved someone's life through capabilities she had spent years developing. The rest, the attention, the opportunities, the changing perceptions, all of that was secondary to the simple fact that when someone needed help, she had been capable of providing it. As she walked out of the colonel's office with her father, Elena thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Every doubt she had faced, every person who had underestimated her, every challenge that had seemed impossible, all of it had prepared her for the moment when it truly mattered. The desert had tested her, and she had not been found wanting. That was the only validation she truly needed. Elena has now proven her capabilities beyond doubt through the impossible rescue. Her father has arrived, providing emotional resonance and validation of her background. The military command is recognizing that her achievement represents teachable skills, not just an anomaly. Part 3 will show the lasting impact, the transformation of those around her, and her legacy. Word of Elena's rescue spread through Fort Irwin with the speed of wildfire through dry brush. By the second day following the incident, her story had reached every training unit on the base, and by the third day, It had spread to military installations across the country through the informal networks that connected soldiers worldwide. The morning Elena returned to training, still moving carefully due to lingering muscle soreness, she found the atmosphere in her unit fundamentally changed. The skeptical glances had been replaced by expressions of respect. The whispered doubts had transformed into murmurs of admiration. And most significantly, the invisible walls that had separated her from full acceptance had simply dissolved. Drill Sergeant Cruz returned to limited duty 5 days after the incident, his leg in a walking cast and his head wound healing cleanly. His first action upon returning was to call formation for the entire training company, all 180 recruits, assembled in the pre-dawn darkness. Uncertain why they had been summoned for this unusual gathering, Cruz positioned himself at the front of the formation, his posture military perfect despite his injuries. Elena stood in her normal position in the third row, trying to remain inconspicuous, sensing that this formation had something to do with the rescue but unsure exactly what was coming. "Listen up," Cruz's voice carried across the assembled recruits with his characteristic authority. "Some of you have heard rumors about what happened during the desert qualification course last week. Some of those rumors are exaggerated. Some don't capture the full reality. So I'm going to tell you exactly what occurred, and you're going to understand why it matters." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the formation, before settling on Elena. Private Reyes, front and center. Elena felt her stomach drop, but she moved with controlled precision to stand directly in front of Cruz. Every eye in the formation now focused on her small frame. "Private Reyes," Cruz continued, his voice formal but carrying undertones that suggested deep emotion held carefully in check. "On the morning of October 14th, while completing a desert qualification exercise, you heard my call for help from a location off the designated course route. You investigated and found me injured with a compound leg fracture, head trauma, and no means of communication due to terrain interference." The formation was absolutely silent, every recruit listening with complete attention. "You performed field medical assessment and determined that leaving me in place while you sought help posed greater risks than attempting immediate evacuation. You then constructed an improvised carrying harness using available materials, and you transported me 2 miles through desert terrain in temperatures exceeding 115 degrees. Cruz's voice grew stronger, the pride in it now unmistakable. "For those of you doing the math, Private Reyes weighs 118 pounds. I weigh 212 pounds. That means she carried nearly twice her own body weight for 2 miles through soft sand and rocky terrain after already completing 10 miles of the body qualification course with full combat load." Murmurs spread through the formation, amazement, disbelief, and dawning respect all mixed together. Medical personnel confirmed that your actions likely prevented serious complications from heat exposure and immobilization. Your tactical decision-making, technical execution, and physical endurance were exceptional by any standard. Private Reyes, you saved my life through a combination of skill, determination, and capabilities that exceed anything I've witnessed in 22 years of military service. Cruz shifted his weight, his expression intensifying. "But more than that, you demonstrated the fundamental principle that defines exceptional soldiers. You refused to abandon a teammate when conditions became difficult. You didn't calculate the personal cost or worry about whether success was guaranteed. You assessed the situation, determined the best course of action, and executed without hesitation." He took a step closer to Elena, his voice dropping slightly but still carrying to every recruit in the formation. "Private Reyes, I doubted you when you arrived at this training center. I saw your size and made assumptions about your capabilities. I was wrong. You proved that strength isn't measured in pounds lifted or inches of height. It's measured in determination, skill, and the absolute refusal to quit when others are counting on you." Cruz straightened to full attention, and what happened next sent chills through every person witnessing it. Slowly, deliberately, with absolute precision, Drill Sergeant Victor Cruz raised his right hand in a salute to Private Elena Reyes, a formal military salute that enlisted personnel gave to officers, but that drill sergeants virtually never gave to recruits. The gesture's significance was impossible to miss. Cruz wasn't just acknowledging Elena's rescue. He was demonstrating profound respect earned through extraordinary service. The kind of respect that transcended rank and protocol. Elena, stunned but responding on instinct, returned the salute with equal precision. For a moment, they stood like that, the legendary drill sergeant and the small recruit who had saved his life, and the image would be captured by training photographers and become one of the most iconic photographs in Fort Irwin's history. Cruz held the salute for several seconds longer than protocol required, making absolutely certain that every recruit understood the depth of his respect. Then he lowered his hand and spoke again, this time addressing the entire formation. Private Reyes has set a standard that I expect all of you to aspire to. Not the physical feat itself, that required specific preparation and experience that most of you don't possess, but the mindset behind it, the tactical thinking, the refusal to accept conventional limitations, and the commitment to teammates that supersedes personal comfort. He paused one final time, his gaze sweeping across the assembled recruits. If any of you still harbor doubts about whether women belong in combat roles, or whether physical size determines military effectiveness, look at Private Reyes and reconsider your assumptions. She just accomplished something most of you couldn't do, and she did it with humility and professionalism that should make all of you proud to serve alongside her. Dismissed. As the formation broke up, Elena found herself immediately surrounded by recruits wanting to congratulate her, ask questions, or simply express their amazement. Jessica Harper pushed through the crowd and grabbed Elena in a bear hug that lifted her off the ground. That was incredible. Cruz never salutes recruits. Do you understand what just happened? Elena was still processing the moment, her emotions a complex mixture of pride, embarrassment, and something deeper, a sense that she had somehow become a symbol of something larger than just her individual achievement. Marcus Bennett approached more hesitantly, his expression showing genuine remorse. Reyes, I owe you more than just an apology. I treated you like you were less capable because of your size, and you proved that I was measuring the wrong things. I learned something important from watching what you did, and I'm genuinely grateful for that lesson. Elena extended her hand, and Bennett shook it with obvious respect. We're all learning, Bennett. That's the point of training. You'll be a better soldier for understanding that there are different ways to be strong. Throughout the day, as training exercises continued, Elena noticed subtle but significant changes in how she was treated. Instructors sought her input on technique demonstrations. Fellow recruits asked for advice on desert operations. And most importantly, the questions people asked weren't about how she was different, but about how they could learn from her approach. That evening, Cruz found Elena in the training equipment shed, where she was methodically cleaning and organizing her gear. He entered quietly and stood watching her work for a moment before speaking. You didn't enjoy that formation this morning, did you? Elena looked up, surprised he had noticed. I appreciate the recognition, Drill Sergeant, but I'm uncomfortable being singled out. I just did what needed to be done. Cruz nodded slowly. I understand that instinct. But Reyes, whether you like it or not, what you did matters beyond just saving my life. You've challenged assumptions that have limited opportunities for qualified soldiers. You've demonstrated capabilities that will influence training protocols and selection criteria. That's not about ego or personal glory, it's about making the Army better. He moved closer, his expression serious. The salute this morning wasn't just for you. It was for every soldier who's been underestimated because they don't fit conventional expectations. It was a statement that this training unit recognizes excellence in all its forms. And, yes, it was my personal recognition that you taught me something important about leadership and capability assessment. Elena met his gaze directly. Drill Sergeant, you've been an excellent instructor. Fair, demanding, and committed to making us better soldiers. The fact that you initially doubted me doesn't diminish that. Everyone makes assumptions. What matters is that you adjusted your assessment based on actual performance. That's generous of you, Cruz replied. But I should have looked deeper from the beginning. Your file showed ranch work in desert conditions, emergency response experience, and physical conditioning that suggested capabilities beyond your size. I saw the surface and made lazy assumptions. That's a failure of leadership. Then you'll be a better leader for recognizing it, Elena said simply. And the soldiers you train in the future will benefit from what you learned. That's how progress happens. Cruz smiled slightly, recognizing the wisdom in her words. How did you get so mature? At 22 years old. Grew up solving problems that couldn't wait for me to feel ready. My father used to say, situations don't care about your age or your doubts. They only care whether you can handle them. I learned early to focus on capability instead of feelings. As Cruz left the equipment shed, he found himself thinking about how rare it was to encounter someone whose actions and character were so perfectly aligned. Elena Reyes didn't just talk about values like determination, humility, and commitment to teammates. She embodied them naturally, without apparent effort or self-consciousness. The story continued, spreading beyond Fort Irwin's boundaries. Military news outlets picked up the incident, and within a week, Elena found herself featured in articles about exceptional military achievements. Training commands at other installations began requesting details about her techniques and background preparation. The attention reached its peak when Elena received notification that she had been selected to receive the Army Commendation Medal for Heroism, a significant recognition for any soldier, but particularly remarkable for a recruit still in basic training. The awards ceremony would be held in 3 weeks, and senior officers from Training Command would be in attendance. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 2 weeks after the rescue, Elena received a letter forwarded through official channels. The return address showed it came from Fort Benning, Georgia, and the sender was listed as Captain Sarah Martinez. The same Sarah Martinez whose story Elena had heard during recruit orientation, the legendary soldier who had carried an injured teammate 3 miles through Georgia wilderness years earlier. Elena opened the letter with hands that trembled slightly, moved by the connection to someone whose achievement had inspired her own determination. Dear Private Reyes, I heard about your rescue of Drill Sergeant Cruz through military networks, and I felt compelled to reach out personally. Your accomplishment reminded me of my own experience carrying an injured teammate during basic training, a moment that changed my life and my understanding of what human beings are capable of achieving. People will tell you that what you did was impossible, that the math doesn't work, that no one your size should be able to accomplish such a feat. I heard the same things. But we both know the truth. Impossible is just a word people use for things they haven't figured out how to do yet. What you demonstrated wasn't superhuman strength, it was superior preparation, intelligent technique, and absolute commitment to a teammate in need. Those are teachable qualities, and your example will inspire countless other soldiers to reconsider their own limitations. The attention you're receiving now will be both rewarding and challenging. People will want to make you a symbol, to use your story for various purposes, to place expectations on you that have nothing to do with your actual goals and values. My advice: stay focused on becoming the best soldier you can be. Let your continued performance speak louder than any single achievement, no matter how remarkable. You've already proven you belong in military service. Now prove that your rescue of Drill Sergeant Cruz wasn't an anomaly but a reflection of capabilities you'll demonstrate consistently throughout your career. I'm proud of you, and I'm honored that soldiers like you are carrying forward the tradition of excellence that breaks barriers and redefines what's possible. With respect and admiration, Captain Sarah Martinez, U.S. Army Medical Corps. Elena, read the letter 3 times, feeling a connection to someone who understood exactly what she was experiencing. The attention, the disbelief, the attempts to explain away the achievement. Martinez had faced all of it and had built a distinguished career despite the pressure. She carefully folded the letter and placed it in her footlocker next to the letters from her father, creating a small collection of words that reminded her who she was and what she valued most: family, service, and the quiet determination to accomplish difficult things without seeking glory. That night, as Elena lay in her bunk listening to the sounds of the barracks settling into sleep, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few weeks. She had arrived at Fort Irwin hoping to prove she deserved a place in military service. Instead, she had discovered that she possessed capabilities she hadn't fully recognized, and that those capabilities could save lives and influence how the Army understood human potential. But more than the recognition, or the awards, or the changing perceptions, what mattered most was the simple knowledge that when someone needed help, she had been strong enough to provide it. That was the true measure of a soldier, and everything else was just details. Tomorrow would bring new training challenges, and Elena would face them with the same quiet competence she brought to everything. Because that's what soldiers did. They showed up, did the work, and took care of their teammates without needing constant validation or recognition. The desert had tested her and found her worthy. Now she would prove that the rescue wasn't a one-time achievement, but a reflection of who she was and who she would continue to be throughout her military career. 3 weeks after the rescue, the award ceremony took place in Fort Irwin's main assembly hall. The room was filled with training personnel, fellow recruits, and senior officers who had traveled from training command headquarters to witness the recognition of an achievement that was already becoming legendary throughout military circles. Elena stood at attention in her dress uniform, feeling uncomfortable with the attention but understanding that this ceremony represented something larger than personal recognition. Colonel Hawthorne had explained that the Army needed to publicly acknowledge achievements that challenged conventional assumptions and opened doors for capable soldiers who might otherwise be overlooked. Her father sat in the front row of the audience section, his weathered face showing fierce pride. Next to him sat Drill Sergeant Cruz, his legs still in a cast, but his posture military straight, determined to witness the recognition of the recruit who had saved his life. Brigadier General Patricia Donovan, the commanding officer of Army Training Command, stepped to the podium to present the award. She was a career soldier with 30 years of service, known for her commitment to excellence and her skepticism toward anything that seemed more about publicity than substance. Ladies and gentlemen, General Donovan began, her voice carrying natural authority. We are gathered today to recognize an achievement that exemplifies the finest qualities of military service: tactical thinking under pressure, physical courage in the face of overwhelming odds, and absolute commitment to fellow soldiers. She paused, her eyes moving to Elena. Private Elena Reyes, please step forward. Elena moved with controlled precision to stand directly in front of the general. Every eye in the assembly hall focused on her small frame in its crisp dress uniform. On October 14th of this year, Donovan continued, Private Reyes was completing a desert qualification exercise when she discovered Drill Sergeant Victor Cruz injured and immobilized in a location where communications were impossible and environmental conditions posed immediate threat to his survival. The general's voice grew stronger, emphasizing each detail. Private Reyes performed field medical assessment, determined that immediate evacuation was required, and constructed an improvised carrying system using available materials. She then transported Drill Sergeant Cruz, who outweighs her by 94 pounds, approximately 2 miles, through desert terrain in temperatures exceeding 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Donovan turned to face Elena directly. Private Reyes, what you accomplished that day was remarkable, not just for the physical achievement, but for the decision-making and mental toughness it demonstrated. You assessed a crisis situation, chose the most effective course of action despite its difficulty, and executed that action with technical proficiency that saved a fellow soldier's life. The general lifted the medal case, opening it to reveal the Army Commendation Medal with its distinctive green and white ribbon. For heroism involving voluntary risk of life under conditions not involving actual combat, it is my honor to present you with the Army Commendation Medal. As Donovan pinned the medal to Elena's uniform, the assembly hall erupted in applause. Genuine, sustained recognition from military personnel who understood exactly how extraordinary her achievement had been. The sound washed over Elena like a wave, validation that felt both humbling and empowering. But the ceremony wasn't finished. General Donovan raised her hand for silence, and the room quickly quieted. Before we conclude, Donovan said, I want to address something that Private Reyes's achievement has revealed about our training and selection processes. For decades, the Army has relied on standardized physical requirements designed to ensure combat readiness. Those requirements are necessary and appropriate for most circumstances. She paused, choosing her words carefully. However, Private Reyes has demonstrated that exceptional operational effectiveness can come from sources we don't always measure or recognize. Her practical experience with desert operations, her technical knowledge of emergency rescue procedures, and her mental toughness under extreme conditions created a capability profile that our standard assessments failed to fully capture. The general's gaze swept across the assembled officers and training personnel. This should prompt all of us to ask important questions. How many other qualified candidates have we overlooked because they didn't fit conventional expectations? What capabilities are we failing to recognize and develop? How can we better identify soldiers whose specific skills and experiences might prove invaluable in crisis situations? It was a remarkable statement, a senior general openly acknowledging that existing systems might be incomplete and needed reconsideration. Several officers in the audience exchanged glances, recognizing the significance of this public declaration. Private Reyes's achievement isn't just her individual success, Donovan continued. It's a demonstration that the Army must constantly evolve our understanding of what makes effective soldiers. We need to value efficiency as much as raw strength, practical experience as much as standardized test scores, and mental toughness as much as physical measurements. She turned back to Elena, her expression softening slightly. Private Reyes, you've set an example that will influence training protocols and selection criteria for years to come. More importantly, you've proven that service to fellow soldiers transcends all other considerations. That's the heart of what being a soldier means. General Donovan stepped back and, in a gesture that mirrored Cruz's earlier salute but carried even greater significance coming from such senior rank, she rendered a crisp military salute to the young private standing before her. Elena returned the salute with absolute precision, feeling the weight of the moment and understanding that this ceremony represented something larger than personal achievement. It was recognition that the Army was willing to reconsider fundamental assumptions when evidence demanded it. As the ceremony concluded and people began moving toward the reception area, Marcus Bennett approached Elena with an expression that mixed respect and residual shame. He had recovered fully from his heat exhaustion and had actually improved significantly as a soldier in the weeks following the incident. Reyes, I need to say something publicly that I should have said weeks ago. Bennett's voice was loud enough to carry to nearby groups of soldiers. When you arrived at Fort Irwin, I made assumptions about your capabilities based on your size and gender. I was wrong in the worst possible way. You proved that determination, intelligence, and preparation matter more than physical advantages. He extended his hand formally. You're a better soldier than I am, and I'm grateful to be serving alongside you. I learned something important from watching you, and I'm committed to being the kind of teammate who recognizes excellence in all its forms. Elena shook his hand firmly. Bennett, you're a strong soldier with good capabilities. You just needed to understand that there are different definitions of strength. The fact that you recognized that and adjusted your perspective shows character. That's what matters. Jessica Harper joined them, her athletic frame towering over Elena, but her expression showing nothing but admiration and friendship. Elena, I know you're uncomfortable with attention, but I need you to understand what today means. There are young women all over the country who are watching your story and realizing that military service is possible for them. You've opened doors that have been closed for too long. That's not why I did it, Elena protested. I just helped someone who needed it. I know, Jessica replied gently. That's exactly why it matters so much. You didn't set out to prove anything or break barriers. You just performed to your capabilities without thinking about limitations others wanted to impose. That's the most powerful statement possible. Cruz approached with his characteristic directness, though his expression showed more emotion than Elena had ever seen during training. Reyes, I want you to meet someone. He gestured to an older man standing nearby, someone Elena immediately recognized from photographs she had seen during recruit orientation. "Private Reyes," Cruz said formally. "This is Command Sergeant Major Robert Chen. He was my drill instructor 20 years ago. And he taught me most of what I know about training soldiers." Chen extended his hand to Elena, his grip firm, and his eyes showing the kind of assessment that came from decades of evaluating military personnel. "Private Reyes, Drill Sergeant Cruz has told me your story. I traveled from Fort Jackson specifically to meet you, and to see firsthand the soldier who reminded him, and reminded all of us, what's truly important in military service. Sir, I'm honored, but I really just did what any soldier would do." Chen smiled slightly. "That's exactly what Cruz said you'd say. But Private, the point isn't that any soldier would have made the same decision. The point is that most soldiers wouldn't have been capable of executing it successfully even if they wanted to. You possessed a unique combination of skills, experience, and mental toughness that saved a life. That deserves recognition." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "I've been training soldiers for 38 years. I've seen thousands of recruits come through basic training, and I've watched their careers develop. Private Reyes, you have the potential to be an exceptional soldier and leader. The question is whether you'll let this moment define your entire career or whether you'll treat it as simply the first of many achievements." Elena felt the weight of his words and recognized the wisdom behind. "Sir, my goal is to be a consistently effective soldier throughout my career. This incident was significant, but it shouldn't be the peak of what I accomplish. It should be evidence of the foundation I'm building." Chen nodded with obvious approval. "Outstanding answer. That's exactly the mindset that creates distinguished careers rather than one-hit wonders." As the reception continued, Elena found herself in conversation with soldiers from various backgrounds and ranks, all of them wanting to understand how she had accomplished something that seemed impossible. She answered their questions honestly, emphasizing preparation, technique, and mental conditioning rather than trying to make her achievement seem superhuman. But the most meaningful conversation came near the end of the evening, when her father pulled her aside to a quiet corner of the reception hall. Miguel Reyes said softly, his eyes bright with emotion. "I need you to understand something. What you did out there in the desert, that wasn't just about the rescue itself. It was about proving that everything I taught you, everything we worked on together, had real value and purpose." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I spent 40 years doing ranch work that most people considered simple labor. But I knew that what I was teaching you, the desert wisdom, the emergency protocols, the mental toughness, all of that had importance beyond just ranch operations. Watching you use those lessons to save a life. Watching senior officers recognize the value of that practical knowledge. Elena, you've proven that what we do, how we live, the skills we develop in everyday work, all of that matters." Elena felt tears threatening and fought them back. "Papa, everything I accomplished out there came from you. The carrying techniques, the heat management, the refusal to quit when things got difficult, you taught me all of it. This medal belongs to you as much as it belongs to me." Miguel shook his head firmly. "No, Mija. I taught you the techniques. But the courage to attempt something impossible, the determination to push through when your body was screaming to stop, the tactical thinking that saved Drill Sergeant Cruz's life, that came from inside you. I gave you tools. You decided how to use them." He pulled her into a tight hug, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Your mother would be so proud. She always knew you were destined for something special, even when you were small and everyone doubted you could handle physical challenges. She saw the steel in your soul that I see every time I look at you." As the reception wound down and people began departing, Elena stood for a moment on the steps outside the assembly hall, looking out at the desert landscape that had tested her so thoroughly. The sun was setting, painting the sand and rocks in shades of orange and red, creating the kind of harsh beauty that only desert environments possessed. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the childhood spent working alongside her father in brutal heat, the decision to join the army despite everyone's doubts, the training that had pushed her capabilities to their limits, and finally the crisis that had revealed strengths she hadn't fully recognized in herself. The medal on her chest felt heavy with significance, but Elena understood that it represented a beginning rather than an ending. She had proven she belonged in military service through one extraordinary achievement. Now she would prove it through consistent performance, continued growth, and a career defined by service to teammates and commitment to excellence. The desert wind picked up, carrying the familiar scent of sand and creosote, and Elena smiled slightly. She was home not in the geographic sense, but in the deeper sense of knowing she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Tomorrow would bring new training challenges, and Elena would face them with the same quiet determination she had always possessed. Because that's what soldiers did. They served without seeking glory. They protected their teammates without calculating personal cost, and they refused to accept that difficult missions were impossible. The rescue of Drill Sergeant Cruz would remain a significant achievement, but Elena was determined that it would be remembered as just the first chapter in a career defined by service, excellence, and the absolute refusal to let others' assumptions determine her capabilities. 6 weeks after the rescue, Elena completed her basic training with distinction, graduating at the top of her class in multiple categories including desert operations, tactical decision-making, and peer leadership assessments. The training that had begun with doubt and skepticism ended with Elena positioned as an example of what Army service should look like. But the impact of her rescue extended far beyond her personal achievement. Fort Irwin's training protocols underwent significant revision, incorporating lessons learned from Elena's techniques and decision-making. The changes weren't dramatic overhauls but thoughtful adjustments that emphasized efficiency, practical experience, and mental toughness alongside traditional physical measurements. Drill Sergeant Cruz, fully recovered from his injuries, had become one of the most vocal advocates for re-evaluating selection criteria and training methods. His near-death experience and subsequent rescue had given him perspectives that transformed his approach to instruction. Before the incident, Cruz told a group of new drill instructors during a training seminar, "I evaluated recruits primarily on physical performance metrics. Size, strength, speed, those were the qualities I valued most. Private Reyes forced me to recognize that I was measuring the wrong things." He pulled up a presentation slide showing Elena's carrying harness system. This improvised rescue system demonstrates understanding of leverage, weight distribution, and biomechanics that most formally trained rescue specialists don't possess. Reyes developed this knowledge through practical experience, and it proved more valuable in a crisis than raw strength ever could have been. Another slide showed environmental data from the day of the rescue. The desert conditions that day were genuinely life-threatening. Reyes didn't just survive them, she performed complex physical and mental tasks while managing those conditions. That level of capability came from years of adaptation to similar environments, not from any standardized training program. Cruz's voice took on increased intensity. The lesson here isn't that we should ignore physical fitness requirements. It's that we need to recognize diverse forms of capability and create space for soldiers whose strengths don't fit conventional categories. The Army needs soldiers who can think tactically, adapt to circumstances, and execute missions despite overwhelming odds. Reyes demonstrated all three qualities, and we almost didn't recruit her because she didn't meet arbitrary height and weight preferences. The presentation was part of a broader initiative that Colonel Hawthorne had championed following the incident. Fort Irwin became a testing ground for revised training protocols that valued efficiency, practical experience, and demonstrated capability alongside traditional metrics. One significant change was the creation of an adaptive assessment track that allowed recruits with specialized backgrounds, ranch work, wilderness survival, technical skills, or other relevant experience to demonstrate capabilities through practical evaluation rather than just standardized testing. Elena herself became involved in developing these assessments, working alongside training specialists to create scenarios that revealed real-world capabilities. Her practical knowledge and recent experience provided valuable perspectives that formal military training sometimes overlooked. The key, Elena explained during one development session, is creating situations where different approaches can all be valid. Traditional strength is one solution, but efficiency, technique, and tactical thinking can achieve the same objectives through different methods. We need assessments that recognize multiple paths to success. 3 months after graduation, Elena reported to her first permanent duty station at Fort Bliss, Texas, where she would serve as a combat medic with specialized training in desert operations. The assignment perfectly matched her capabilities and interests, positioning her to use the skills she had demonstrated during the rescue while continuing to develop as a soldier. But before leaving Fort Irwin, she received a request to meet with a group of incoming female recruits who had specifically asked to speak with her. Elena agreed, though she remained uncomfortable with being treated as any kind of celebrity or role model. The meeting took place in a small classroom, with 17 young women who had recently arrived for basic training. They ranged in size from a 6-foot-tall former basketball player to a 5-foot-even woman from rural Montana. But they all shared the same expression: determination mixed with uncertainty about whether they truly belonged in military service. Private Reyes. One of them began nervously. "We've all heard about what you did carrying Drill Sergeant Cruz through the desert. Some of us are wondering, were you scared? Did you ever think you couldn't do it?" Elena considered the question carefully, recognizing its deeper significance. These women weren't just asking about one incident, they were asking whether their own doubts and fears were normal. "I was terrified," Elena replied honestly. "Not primarily of failing, though that was certainly a concern. I was terrified of the consequences if I didn't try. The thought that Drill Sergeant Cruz might die because I wasn't willing to attempt something difficult. That fear outweighed my doubts about my own capabilities." She leaned forward, her voice taking on increased intensity. "But here's what I learned from that experience. The doubts never completely go away. I still question whether I'm strong enough, fast enough, capable enough. The difference is that I've learned not to let those doubts determine my actions. I assess situations based on actual requirements rather than my feelings about them." Another recruit, the tall basketball player, raised her hand. "But how do you deal with people who doubt you because of your size? How do you prove yourself without getting exhausted from constantly having to demonstrate your capabilities?" "You don't prove yourself to them," Elena replied firmly. "You prove yourself to yourself through consistent performance. The people who doubt you based on your size or gender, their opinions aren't your responsibility. What's your responsibility is showing up every day, doing the work, and executing your duties with excellence." She paused, making sure they understood. "Here's what I wish someone had told me when I arrived. You don't need anyone's permission to be here. You don't need to apologize for not fitting conventional expectations. The Army accepted you because you met their standards. Now your job is to maintain those standards and develop your capabilities, not to convince skeptics that you deserve your place." The woman from Montana, who looked barely old enough to have graduated high school, spoke up quietly. "But what if you fail? What if you try something and you can't do it? Doesn't that just confirm what the doubters believed?" Elena smiled slightly, recognizing the fear behind the question. "Failure is how you learn. I've failed at plenty of things during training. The obstacle course wall defeated me multiple times before I figured out proper technique. I got lost during land navigation exercises. I struggled with equipment I'd never used before. Failure doesn't confirm doubters' beliefs, it's simply part of developing any skill." She stood and moved to stand directly in front of the group. "Here's what I want you to understand. My rescue of Drill Sergeant Cruz has gotten a lot of attention, and people treat it like some kind of superhuman achievement. But the truth is much simpler. I succeeded because I had specific preparation. I understood the environment, and I refused to quit when things got difficult. Those are all learnable qualities. You don't need to carry someone 2 miles through the desert to be a good soldier. You need to show up, do your job, support your teammates, and continually work to improve. That's what creates distinguished military careers: consistency, not one dramatic moment." The basketball player spoke again. So, what advice would you give us for making it through training? Elena considered the question for a moment before responding. First, don't compare yourself to others. Focus on your own progress and capabilities. Second, find your advantages and develop them. If you're not the strongest, maybe you're the fastest, or the most accurate, or the best tactical thinker. Every soldier brings different strengths to their team. Third, she continued, build relationships with your fellow recruits. The people going through training with you are your first real team. Support them. Learn from them. And recognize that everyone succeeds when you help each other improve. Fourth, remember why you joined. When training gets difficult, and it will get very difficult, you need to remember what motivated you to serve. That motivation will carry you through moments when you want to quit. And finally, Elena's voice grew quieter but more intense. Never let anyone convince you that your presence in military service is political or controversial. You're here to serve your country and protect your fellow soldiers. That's not political, that's patriotic. Anyone who suggests otherwise doesn't understand what service means. The meeting continued for another hour, with the recruits asking questions about everything from dealing with skeptical drill sergeants to managing physical challenges to handling the isolation that could come from being one of few women in a training unit. Elena answered each question honestly, sharing both her successes and her struggles, making sure these young women understood that she wasn't some exceptional case, but simply a soldier who had prepared well and refused to quit when circumstances became difficult. As the meeting concluded and the recruits filed out, the woman from Montana lingered behind. Private Reyes, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever feel like you're carrying the weight of everyone's expectations? Like if you fail at something, it won't just affect you but will reflect badly on all women in military service? Elena recognized the question immediately, because she had struggled with exactly that pressure. Yes. Every single day. It's an unfair burden that male soldiers don't have to carry. When a man fails, he's just one individual who didn't meet standards. When a woman fails, some people treat it as evidence that all women are unsuited for military service. She met the young recruit's eyes directly. But here's what I've learned. Retry B. Continue. You can't let that unfair pressure paralyze you. Yes, people will judge all women based on your performance in ways they wouldn't judge all men. That's wrong, but it's reality. The answer isn't to be perfect, that's impossible. The answer is to be consistently good, to learn from mistakes, and to demonstrate that women's capabilities are as diverse as men's. Elena's voice softened. Some women will be exceptional soldiers. Some will be average. Some won't make it through training. That's exactly the same distribution you see with male recruits. The goal isn't for every woman to be exceptional, it's for everyone to have fair opportunity to demonstrate their actual capabilities. The young recruit nodded slowly, clearly processing the advice. Thank you. That helps more than you know. After she left, Elena stood alone in the empty classroom for a moment, thinking about the responsibility that came with her newfound visibility. She hadn't asked to become a symbol or role model, but she understood that her achievement had opened doors and created opportunities for others. That meant something, whether she was comfortable with it or not. 6 months after the rescue, Elena received an unexpected package at Fort Bliss. Inside was a letter and a small wooden carving, a desert hawk in flight, its wings spread wide and every feather detailed with remarkable precision. The letter was from Cruz. Reyes. I carved this during my recovery. Had to do something with my hands while my leg healed, and I kept thinking about that day in the desert. You probably don't know this, but when I was lying there injured, I watched a hawk circling overhead. I remember thinking that if I didn't make it, at least I'd die looking at something beautiful. Then you showed up, and I realized I wasn't going to die because you refused to accept that saving me was impossible. The hawk reminded me of you, small, efficient, and capable of things that seem impossible until you witness them. So I carved this to say thank you in a way that words can't quite capture. You saved my life. But you also taught me something more important. that I had been measuring the wrong things for 20 years. I'm a better drill sergeant now because of what you showed me. The soldiers I train are better prepared because I finally understand that capability comes in forms I wasn't recognizing. You're going to have a distinguished career, Reyes. I know that, as certainly as I know anything. But more than that, you're going to influence how the Army understands capability and potential. That's a legacy that matters far beyond any individual achievement. Stay safe out there. And if you're ever near Fort Irwin, stop by. I'll buy you a beer and tell you stories about all the recruits who've heard about you and showed up determined to prove they can do the impossible too. With respect and gratitude, Victor Cruz. Elena placed the carved hawk on her small desk in her barracks room, where it joined the letters from her father and Captain Martinez. These physical reminders of support and recognition helped ground her when the attention and expectations felt overwhelming. Her work as a combat medic proved to be exactly the right fit for her capabilities. The combination of medical knowledge, physical endurance, and tactical decision-making required for the role aligned perfectly with her strengths. She excelled in training exercises, earned respect from her unit, and continued developing capabilities that would serve her throughout her career. But the rescue's impact continued rippling through military communities in ways Elena hadn't anticipated. Training commands across multiple branches began implementing revised assessment protocols influenced by the lessons learned from her achievement. Research teams studied her carrying techniques and environmental management strategies, incorporating findings into formal training curricula. Most significantly, recruitment numbers for women in combat roles increased substantially in the months following the rescue's publicity. Young women across the country saw Elena's story and recognized that military service was possible for them, regardless of whether they fit conventional expectations about size and strength. 1 year after the rescue, Fort Irwin held a ceremony dedicating a new training facility, the Mojave Desert Operations Center, named in recognition of Elena's achievement and its impact on training methodology. Elena was invited to attend but requested that the ceremony be low-key and focused on the facility's practical purpose rather than celebration of her individual achievement. Colonel Hawthorne, who had been promoted to Brigadier General and transferred to Training Command Headquarters, spoke at the dedication. The Mojave Desert Operations Center represents more than recognition of one soldier's extraordinary achievement, Hawthorne explained to the assembled personnel. It represents the Army's commitment to continually evolving our understanding of capability, to recognizing diverse forms of excellence, and to creating opportunities for qualified soldiers regardless of whether they fit conventional expectations. He gestured toward the facility behind him. This center will train soldiers in desert operations using protocols influenced by Private Reyes's techniques and decision-making. Students will learn not just standard procedures, but adaptive thinking that allows them to accomplish missions despite overwhelming obstacles. They'll understand that efficiency can overcome raw strength, that preparation can substitute for size, and that determination can push human capabilities far beyond what standardized tests predict. Elena attended the ceremony, but declined requests to speak publicly, preferring to let her continued service speak for itself. She understood the symbolic importance of the facility bearing her name, but she remained uncomfortable with personal recognition that felt disproportionate to what she still considered simply doing her job. After the ceremony, she spent time touring the facility with training instructors, offering practical insights about desert operations and discussing how her experiences could translate into effective training exercises. This kind of contribution, quiet, practical, focused on improving systems rather than celebrating individual achievement, felt much more comfortable than awards ceremonies and public recognition. 3 years after the rescue, Elena had advanced to specialist rank and was serving with a medical unit deployed to a training mission in Jordan. The desert environment felt like home, and her expertise in desert operations made her an invaluable resource for the unit. One evening, after a long day of training exercises with Jordanian military partners, Elena received an email from Jessica Harper, who had remained a close friend since their time together at Fort Irwin. "Elena, you need to know something that's happening back home. There's a young woman named Maria Santos, who just graduated from basic training at Fort Jackson. She's 4'11", weighs maybe 105 pounds, and she just completed the same qualification course where you rescued crews. Here's the thing. She carried her injured drill instructor 3 miles through swampland in South Carolina. 3 miles. Through terrain that most people would consider impassable even without carrying someone. When reporters asked her how she did it, she said, "I read about Private Reyes carrying drill sergeant crews through the desert. If she could do that in 120-degree heat, I could handle humid swamps." She proved it was possible. Elena, do you understand what's happening? Your achievement didn't just open doors, it created a new standard for what people believe they can accomplish. Maria Santos attempted the essence of use, something impossible, because you had already demonstrated that impossible was just another word for difficult. There are probably dozens more stories like hers that we'll never hear about soldiers pushing beyond conventional limitations because your example showed them it could be done. That's your real legacy, not the medal or the facility bearing your name. You changed what people believe is possible, and that's going to influence generations of soldiers who've never even met you. Proud to serve alongside you, always. Jessica. Elena read the email multiple times, feeling emotions she couldn't quite name. She had never wanted to be inspirational or to set examples for others. She had simply wanted to serve effectively and help teammates when they needed it. But Harper was right about the broader impact. By refusing to accept that her size determined her capabilities, by demonstrating that preparation and determination could overcome physical disadvantages, Elena had inadvertently created space for others to attempt their own impossible achievements. She thought about Maria Santos, who she had never met, carrying an injured instructor through swampland because Elena's example had proven it was possible. She thought about the 17 female recruits she had spoken with at Fort Irwin, some of whom were now serving in combat roles. They might never have attempted without seeing evidence that women could excel in those positions. The responsibility felt heavy, but Elena was beginning to understand that this was part of what it meant to serve, not just completing your own missions, but inspiring others to discover their own capabilities. 5 years after the rescue, Elena had been promoted to sergeant and was serving as a senior combat medic with extensive desert operations experience. She had deployed twice to the Middle East, earned additional commendations for medical performance under fire, and established herself as exactly what she had always wanted to be, a consistently excellent soldier whose capabilities spoke louder than any single dramatic achievement. But the rescue remained part of her identity in ways she couldn't escape. New soldiers in her unit would eventually hear the story and approach her with questions. Training instructors referenced her techniques in their classes. And occasionally, she would receive letters from young women across the country who had heard her story and found inspiration in it. One letter, from a 16-year-old in Wyoming, particularly moved her. "Dear Sergeant Reyes, I'm 5'1", and I've wanted to join the Army since I was 12 years old. But everyone, my parents, my teachers, my guidance counselor, keeps telling me I'm too small, that I should choose something more realistic, that military service isn't for people like me. Then I heard your story about carrying drill sergeant crews through the desert. I read everything I could find about it, and I realized that the people telling me I'm too small are just measuring the wrong things. I've started training the way the articles said you trained, focusing on efficiency instead of raw strength, building endurance in heat, learning proper technique for carrying heavy loads. I'm also getting perfect grades because I understand now that mental toughness is as important as physical capability. I'm joining the Army in 2 years when I graduate high school. And when people tell me I'm too small, I'm going to tell them about you and remind them that impossible is just another word for things we haven't figured out how to do yet. Thank you for showing people like me that we belong in military service, even if we don't look like conventional soldiers. With respect and admiration." Katie Morrison. Elena wrote back to Katie, offering encouragement and practical advice while emphasizing that military service required dedication and preparation regardless of size. But she also felt a deep satisfaction knowing that her achievement had created tangible opportunities for young women who might otherwise have been discouraged from pursuing their goals. 10 years after the rescue, Elena had been promoted to staff sergeant and was serving as a senior medical instructor at Fort Sam Houston, where she trained new combat medics. Her career had been distinguished but not flashy, consistently excellent performance. Numerous commendations for medical expertise, and a reputation as someone who could be counted on in any situation. Drill Sergeant Cruz, now Sergeant Major Cruz, and approaching retirement, came to visit during a training conference. They hadn't seen each other in person for several years, though they maintained occasional correspondence. "Reyes," Cruz said as they sat in the training center cafeteria, "I want you to know something. In the 12 years since that day in the desert, I've trained approximately 2,400 soldiers, and I can trace a direct line from what you taught me that day to improvements in how every single one of those soldiers was prepared for service." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I stopped evaluating recruits primarily on physical measurements. I started looking for determination, adaptability, practical experience, and mental toughness. And you know what I discovered? The soldiers who excel in those qualities consistently outperform the ones who just look strong on paper." "That's good to hear," Elena replied. "It means the lesson from that day extended beyond just you and me." "It extended far beyond us," Cruz corrected. "Fort Irwin's training protocols changed. Other installations adopted similar approaches. Selection criteria were revised. And most importantly, thousands of qualified soldiers who might have been overlooked because of size, gender, or unconventional backgrounds got opportunities to serve." He pulled out a small photo from his wallet, a picture of himself standing with a group of recruits, all of them female, all of them significantly smaller than the traditional soldier profile. "That's my most recent graduating class. 5 years ago, 3 of those women probably wouldn't have been recruited. Today, they're all going to combat roles, and they're all exceptionally well prepared for service." Cruz's voice took on increased emotion. "Reyes, you saved my life that day. But you also helped me become the instructor I should have been all along. That's a debt I'll never fully repay." Elena smiled slightly. "You don't owe me anything, Sergeant Major. We're soldiers. We take care of each other. That's the whole point of service." 15 years after the rescue, Elena had been promoted to Sergeant First Class and was serving as the senior medical NCO for a battalion preparing for deployment. She had spent her entire adult life in military service, exactly as she had planned when she first stepped off that bus at Fort Irwin. The rescue had become part of military lore, a story told to new recruits about determination and capability, about refusing to accept conventional limitations, about what it meant to truly commit to fellow soldiers. But for Elena, it remained simply one day in a career defined by thousands of days of consistent service. Her father, now in his 70s but still working the ranch in New Mexico, called her one evening with news that made her laugh and cry simultaneously. "Mija, you remember the arroyo where you carried your brother out during that flash flood when you were 14? "Of course, Papa. That was one of the scariest days of my life. The county just named it Reyes Canyon. Put up a sign and everything. They said it was to honor the family's contributions to the community. But we both know it's really about what you've accomplished." Elena felt tears forming. "Papa, that canyon should be named after you. Everything I've accomplished came from what you taught me." "No, Mija," Miguel replied firmly. "I taught you techniques. You provided the courage and determination. Those came from inside you. I just helped you recognize capabilities you already possessed." They talked for another hour, discussing family news, ranch operations, and Miguel's pride in watching his daughter's distinguished career. As the conversation ended, Elena found herself thinking about the unlikely journey that had brought her from a ranch in New Mexico to a military career that had influenced training protocols and opened opportunities for thousands of other soldiers. 20 years after the rescue, Elena had been promoted to Master Sergeant and was serving as the senior enlisted advisor for a medical training command. She had accumulated 22 years of service and was beginning to think about retirement and what her post-military life might look like. But before she could fully embrace that transition, she received an invitation that brought everything full circle. Fort Irwin was hosting a ceremony marking the 20-year anniversary of the rescue, and they wanted Elena to deliver the keynote address. She initially declined, uncomfortable with the continued attention to one day from decades earlier. But Colonel Hawthorne, now Lieutenant General Hawthorne and commander of all Army Training Command, personally called to explain why her participation mattered. "Elena, this anniversary isn't about celebrating you personally. It's about marking how far the Army has come in recognizing diverse forms of capability. 20 years ago, you carried Drill Sergeant Cruz through the desert and proved that our assessment systems were incomplete. Today, the military is more effective because we finally understand that excellence comes in forms we weren't recognizing. General, with respect, I'm uncomfortable being treated as some kind of symbol. I understand that discomfort." Hawthorne interrupted gently. "But Elena, there are thousands of soldiers currently serving who wouldn't have had opportunities without the doors you opened. They deserve to hear directly from you about what that day meant and what it taught all of us." Elena finally agreed, recognizing that the ceremony represented something larger than personal recognition. The anniversary event was held at the Reyes Desert Operations Center, with several hundred soldiers in attendance, including many who had been directly influenced by revised training protocols developed after the rescue. Cruz was there, now retired but healthy and active. Jessica Harper attended, now a lieutenant colonel serving in Logistics Command. Marcus Bennett came, having built a successful career as a Special Forces operator. But most significantly, Maria Santos was there, the soldier who had carried her injured instructor through South Carolina swampland after being inspired by Elena's example. Santos had gone on to become a distinguished combat medic herself, and her presence created a powerful symbol of how one achievement could inspire others to discover their own capabilities. Elena stood at the podium, looking out at the assembled soldiers, and felt the weight of 2 decades of service and influence settling onto her shoulders. 20 years ago, she began, her voice steady and clear. "I made a decision that seemed relatively simple at the time. I heard someone calling for help. I assessed the situation, and I determined that I could provide assistance. I didn't think about whether it was possible or impossible. I just focused on what needed to be done." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "What I didn't understand then was that simply attempting something difficult would have implications far beyond that single day. I didn't know that refusing to accept conventional limitations would inspire others to reconsider their own capabilities. I didn't know that demonstrating efficiency could substitute for raw strength would influence training protocols across the entire military. I've spent 20 years uncomfortable with the attention that day generated, because I've never wanted to be treated as exceptional. I just wanted to serve effectively and help teammates when they needed it. But I've gradually come to understand that intent doesn't determine impact. What I wanted was simply to save Drill Sergeant Cruz's life. What I accidentally accomplished was challenging assumptions that had limited opportunities for qualified soldiers." Elena's gaze moved across the audience, settling briefly on faces that represented the broader impact of her achievement. There are soldiers in this audience today who wouldn't have had opportunities to serve without the doors that opened after that day. There are training protocols in place that prepare all soldiers more effectively. And most importantly, there's increased recognition that capability comes in diverse forms and that measuring only traditional strengths means overlooking qualified candidates. But here's what I want you to understand. Her voice grew more intense. My achievement that day wasn't superhuman. It was the result of specific preparation, practical experience, and refusal to accept that something couldn't be done just because it was difficult. Those are all qualities that any soldier can develop through dedication and training. The lesson from that day isn't that Elena Reyes is exceptional. The lesson is that human capability exceeds what standardized measurements predict, that determination can push performance beyond conventional expectations, and that the word impossible is often just a reflection of incomplete understanding, rather than actual limitations. She gestured toward Maria Santos in the audience. Staff Sergeant Santos carried her injured instructor 3 miles through swampland after being inspired by my example. She proved that the lesson from my achievement wasn't specific to one person or one environment. It was about what becomes possible when soldiers refuse to accept conventional limitations. And there are countless other stories like hers, soldiers who've accomplished remarkable things because they saw evidence that determination and preparation could overcome physical disadvantages. That's the real legacy of what happened 20 years ago. Not my individual achievement, but the opportunities it created for others to discover their own capabilities. Elena's voice softened as she approached her conclusion. I'm retiring next year after 23 years of service. I'll leave the Army proud of what I've accomplished, but more proud of what my achievement enabled others to accomplish. That's what service means, not individual glory, but creating opportunities and opening doors for the soldiers who come after you. So today, as we mark the 20th anniversary of an event that changed my life and influenced the Army's understanding of capability, I want to say thank you. Thank you to Drill Sergeant Cruz for trusting me when every logical calculation said he shouldn't. Thank you to the commanders who recognized that my achievement revealed incomplete assessment systems and had the courage to make necessary changes. And thank you to every soldier who saw my story and realized that their own perceived limitations might just be assumptions waiting to be challenged. The rescue happened 20 years ago, but its impact continues today and will continue tomorrow through every soldier who refuses to accept that difficult missions are impossible. That's the legacy I'm most proud of, not what I accomplished alone, but what I helped make possible for others. As Elena concluded her remarks, the assembled soldiers rose in spontaneous applause, genuine recognition from people who understood exactly what her achievement had meant for military service and for their own opportunities. But the most meaningful moment came afterward, when a young female private approached her nervously. Sergeant Reyes. My name is Katie Morrison. You probably don't remember, but you wrote to me when I was in high school. I told you I was 5'1", and everyone said I was too small for military service. You encouraged me to focus on developing capabilities rather than worrying about meeting others' expectations. Elena studied the young woman's face and felt recognition dawning. Wyoming. You were from Wyoming, and you were determined to prove that size doesn't determine capability. Katie's face lit up with amazement. You remember? Sergeant. I graduated from basic training last month. I'm assigned to Fort Carson as a combat engineer. And I'm here today because I wanted to say thank you personally for showing people like me that we belong in military service. Elena felt emotions threatening to overwhelm her professional composure. Private Morrison, you belong in the Army because you met standards and committed to service. You don't need to thank me for that. But I do. Katie insisted. Because without your example, I might never have tried. The people telling me I was too small might have convinced me they were right. Your story gave me permission to believe I could succeed despite not fitting conventional expectations. As Elena watched Katie walk away to rejoin her unit, she finally understood what General Hawthorne had been trying to tell her. The rescue's impact wasn't about her personal achievement. It was about what that achievement enabled others to accomplish. She had carried Drill Sergeant Cruz 2 miles through brutal desert conditions to save his life. But inadvertently, she had also carried the hopes and aspirations of thousands of soldiers who needed evidence that their perceived limitations weren't actually limits at all. That was a burden worth carrying. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us where you are watching from and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget.